Chapter 44. The dwarf king sat on a chair in the bedroom of the palace, frowning. What he was facing now was an opportunity that the dwarf race had not encountered for thousands of years. If he could seize this opportunity, there was no doubt that the dwarf race would be able to break through the shackles that had been restricting him. No matter from which aspect, he could make significant progress. Many of the ideas of the dwarf race could be realized. But if he couldn't seize this opportunity, he would undoubtedly be the eternal sinner of the dwarf race. Maybe others wouldn't think so, but the dwarf king himself would certainly not forgive himself. But the problem was that the dwarf race had to use Jilin's flame to smelt the unmelted stones before, so the forging furnace that had been made could not withstand such a high temperature. It was an endless cycle, just like the famous liquid that can melt everything joke. If there was a liquid that could melt everything, then what bottle would you take? And the dwarf king recently realized that the weapon Jilin wanted didn't seem to be so simple. He seemed to be dissatisfied with just a glance at the weapon. What kind of weapon does he want? The dwarf king thought. Jilin walked back to the residence that the dwarves had prepared for them. This was a 2-story hut that the dwarves had specially built for them, suitable for human habitation. Although it took only a short time to build, the dwarf-made house represented a quality assurance. Although the house was small, it had all the essentials. The things made by the dwarves could be seen with a trace of exquisiteness that was in line with human aesthetics. It could be seen that they had really put in a lot of effort. Aisha and the other two were having lunch, and the sumptuous food filled a large table. Vane had returned to normal after a few days of drunkenness. Compared with before, his complexion was a little worse. He spoke less, and his figure was a little thinner. Seeing Jilin come in, Aisha asked, "Everything is done. When are we leaving? It's a pity that we can't hand in the tasks we received." Vane clenched his hands slightly. These 2 tasks were taken by him. At that time, he only wanted to find the 2 most difficult iron-level tasks according to everyone's strength. Now, it seemed that these 2 missions really lived up to their reputation of being the most difficult of the iron-level missions. The mission of helping a noble girl find a lost item turned into infiltrating the Duke's mansion halfway through. In the middle of the mission, he was abandoned by the client. In the end, the client was killed by his own team. This mission was probably over. The second mission, which was to help the dwarf weapon master, became to help the dwarf king find his missing tribesmen. In the process, he caused a huge loss to the Snow Wind Empire, and he also got rid of a client who had an old grudge with him. Therefore, there was no need to think about handing in the quest. Now, Jilin was tired of looking at the snow that he wanted to see. Bane's budding teenage romance had also been ruthlessly uprooted. In the Snow Wind Empire, they had offended both the people they shouldn't and the people they shouldn't have offended. It was time for them to leave. This was Aisha's judgment. Jilin picked an attractive fat chicken from a table, moved the chair away, and sat on the ground to chew. As a result, the sound of a chicken bone being bitten off rang out loudly in the room. Dragons never spit out the bones when eating chicken. In other words, other than humans, there were no carnivores that would spit out the bones when eating chicken. Humans really didn't respect life too much. Jilin swallowed the minced meat and bones in his mouth and said, "It seems that I can't leave now. I'm waiting for the dwarf clan to pay me, but their progress is very slow." Aisha was not surprised. When she saw Jilin break the sword given to him by the dwarf king at the banquet, she knew that Jilin didn't just want to take away a weapon casually. Jilin's attitude on this matter was unexpectedly serious. But Staya was very surprised. "What do you want a weapon for? You still need a weapon?" Staya still remembered the scene of Jilin destroying her house with his bare hands. She couldn't imagine what kind of situation would make Jilin have the idea of, "I need a weapon." Jilin took another bite of the chicken. He didn't tell the others that when Jilin roared and charged at him with a heavy sword, he looked really cool. The light he emitted was even more dazzling than the light of the knight's key in Jilin's eyes. Plus, the scene of a megalosaurus standing on the ground and waving a giant sword was dazzling, wasn't it? So Jilin asked Aisha, "Do you have any way to make the forge withstand my fire and not burn it?" Aisha heard this, and her pair of limpid eyes suddenly became mesmerized. Her sweet smile was full of meaning. It seemed like she had already thought of many plans or schemes in an instant. Even Jilin couldn't help but feel anxious in front of Aisha when she was in such a state. But there was no other way. Jilin's father also told the story of the liquid that can melt everything to Jilin. This was a very simple and common sense problem. It was like eating when you were hungry and drinking when you were thirsty. No matter what kind of creature it was, challenging this common sense problem was harder than ascending to the heavens, because this common sense was the rule of this world. But in Jilin's knowledge, there was only one person who could break this common sense, and that was Aisha. No matter what kind of creature it was, if there was a huge hole in a person's stomach, that person would definitely be dead. But Aisha could instantly recover. Aisha had another characteristic that defied common sense. After so many years, she didn't age at all. In this world, no one could tell Aisha's exact age. Perhaps even Aisha herself couldn't remember. Furthermore, it was common sense in this world that witches could naturally break the common sense. Don't smile like that anymore. I'm afraid I won't be able to resist attacking you. Do you have any ideas? Jilin asked. Aisha cleared her throat and said, "Yes." "What is it?" Jilin asked. In the Middle Empire, there was a legendary method of refining weapons, Aisha said. Jilin and Bane both shook their heads. "Are you talking about blood refining?" Staya asked. "I didn't expect you to know about it." Aisha found it strange. The method of blood refining should have been banned by the humans a long time ago. How could Staya, as a princess of the royal family, know about such a dark thing? "As expected of the idea you came up with," Staya said in a faint voice. "What is it?" Jilin asked. A long time ago, there was a top swordsmith in the Middle Empire. He thought that a real sword should have its own soul. In order to achieve this goal, he consulted a lot of information from the era of gods. Finally, he restored the method of blood refining. When the divine weapon was about to be completed, he threw his wife into the swordsmith pool. As expected, the divine weapon was completed. However, the swordsmith passed away soon after. After that, every owner of the divine sword had a mental breakdown and died. They didn't have a good ending. The Middle Empire thought that it was because the swordsmith method was too cruel. Thus, they banned the method of blood refining, Steyr explained. Bane couldn't help but ask timidly, was the swordsmith's wife willing?" Steyr shook her head and said, "It's impossible to investigate. There are many different opinions." Aisha waved her hand nonchalantly and said, "It's not as serious as she said. Her version is just to scare people. It's a version that was polished to prevent people from coveting the divine sword. If it's really as powerful as she said, how can there be so many owners of the divine sword? The royal family likes to exaggerate." Aisha didn't forget to mock Staya while refuting him. Staya was about to say something when Jilin said first, "I know that. Every human thinks that they are different. They think that others will die, but they won't. That's why it's like this. Haha, what a stupid human. They don't learn from the experiences of their predecessors because they think they're different from them. There are more than 1 billion people. Everyone thinks that they are fated to be different. However, in reality, there are only a few people who are fated to be fated. It's so sad, haha." Staya and the other two looked at each other. They were speechless. "We went off topic," Aisha reminded Jilin. "Oh, go ahead," Jilin said. "The refining method I'm going to talk about is different from the divine sword. To be precise, it's a watered-down version developed by the witches. It can't let the object have its own consciousness, but it can prevent your flames from hurting the refined object. It can also prevent the object from hurting you," Aisha said. "Oh, that is to say," Jilin said. "Yes, you can first smelt a forging furnace. That way, your flames won't burn through it," Aisha said. "All right, I'll go find the Dwarf King now." Jilin slapped the floor and scurried out. "Wait, I haven't finished yet." Jilin rushed all the way to the Dwarf King's bedroom. All the dwarves that passed by didn't stop him, because they knew they couldn't stop him. They tried. Jilin pushed open the door of the Dwarf King's room and said, "Hey, I can solve the problem of the forging furnace." "Oh." The Dwarf King was still frowning, but he jumped up in surprise when he heard Jilin's words. Suddenly, a dwarf also rushed in and knelt down on one knee. "Your Majesty, the Snow Wind Empire declared war on us." Chapter 45. The Snow Wind Empire actually declared war on the dwarves? How preposterous was this matter to him? Everyone knew that after the Snow Wind Empire lost its witches, they relied on the power of the dwarves to maintain their status as one of the 5 great empires. The importance of dwarven technology to the Snow Wind Empire was self-evident, and the harmonious relationship between the Snow Wind Empire and the dwarves was also praised in this world. It was for this reason that the Iron Blood King dared to let people stir up trouble in the Snow Wind Empire. Now, the Snow Wind Empire actually declared war on the dwarves? Did the Iron Blood King want to cut off his own arm? Was he not afraid of the threat of the other empires? Or did the Iron Blood King think that the Snow Wind Empire no longer needed the help of the dwarves? Could they already rely on their own strength to study Morag and learn the technology of the gods' era? The Dwarf King thought. The dwarf soldier said, "Your Majesty, the envoy of the Iron Blood King is waiting for you in the main hall." The Iron Blood King took a deep breath and said to Jilin, "Wait for me to come back. We'll talk about this." Jilin felt a little strange. How could a war between a group of creatures as weak as ants be more important than making weapons for himself? The Dwarf King certainly didn't know what Jilin was thinking. After he finished talking with Jilin, he hurriedly followed the soldier. Jilin also didn't stop them. The Dwarf King walked into the main hall and sat down firmly on the throne. Only then did he look up at the humans below the steps. All the dwarves around him were glaring at him. Judging from their expressions, they must be thinking of killing this person quickly. It was reasonable to say that people in such an environment must be under great pressure. Even if their legs weren't trembling, it was reasonable for their complexion to change greatly. But this person still acted as if there was no one else around. He stood there proudly until the Dwarf King arrived. When the envoy of the Snow Wind Empire saw the Dwarf King looking at him, he bowed slightly and said, "Foreign Minister, the envoy of the Snow Wind Empire has an audience with your Majesty the Dwarf King. May your Majesty the Dwarf King live a long and majestic life." The Dwarf King said with a sinister smile, "Your country is about to attack my dwarf kingdom. Envoy, don't you feel ashamed saying these words now?" The emissary remained unmoved and said, "We humans are a nation of etiquette. No matter when or where, etiquette cannot be abolished. Please forgive us, Dwarf King. I'm not in the mood to play these hypocritical games with you humans. What does the Iron Blood King want? Just say it," the Dwarf King said. Jilin sat on the floor of the Dwarf King's bedroom and thought to himself, "What a good saying." The emissary cupped his hands and said, "The Dwarf King is really straightforward. His Majesty has said that our Snow Wind Empire has received a lot of help from the Dwarf Kingdom since we have struggled through the Snow Wind Empire to this day. Originally, they should be deeply grateful and be on the same side forever. Only then would they not let down the Dwarf Clan's help to the Snow Wind Empire. Therefore, the Dwarf King has many eyes and ears in the Snow Wind Empire, and my king has never interfered. A while ago, the dwarves wanted to have an autonomous city in the Snow Wind Empire. To be honest, this was impossible in any country. No emperor would allow a city that was not under their jurisdiction to appear in their country. But the Iron Blood King said, "What's the difference between the Dwarf Clan and the Snow Wind Empire?" So he agreed to this policy. For this reason, he did not hesitate to alienate the founding father of the Snow Wind Empire, Duke Lawrence. His Majesty's friendship with the dwarves can be said to be deep and righteous. The Dwarf King laughed and said, "Ridiculous. Now that the soldiers are already at the gate, you're actually talking to me about deep and righteous?" "That's right, because you and I have deep and righteous feelings and are brothers." His Majesty the Iron Blood King said that this time, the soldiers are not targeting the dwarves, the emissary said. The army invaded our country's border, and the target is not us dwarves? It seems that our dwarf clan has been low-key under your Snow Wind Empire for many years, and now people really look down on us. But that's fine. Just tell me, where did your Majesty come from? The dwarf king said. The emissary bowed and cupped his hands and said, His Majesty the Iron Blood King said that as long as Your Majesty the dwarf king sends Aisha and her group out of the dwarf kingdom and no longer protects them, we swear to our ancestors that we will never step into the territory of the dwarf kingdom, and the soldiers of the Snow Wind Empire will never destroy the dwarf kingdom. And after that, we will immediately give the dwarves an autonomous city in the Snow Wind Empire, and let bygones be bygones. Your Majesty the dwarf king, what do you think? The dwarf king said angrily, Let bygones be bygones? Our people were imprisoned in your country and suffered humiliation, and you actually say that you won't let bygones be bygones? If you don't punish him, we can't let it go. The emissary said, Your Majesty the dwarf king, these words are a bit too much. Although the masters were indeed invited to work for Master Yin Gang, but for such a long time, my Snow Wind Empire has not done its best to satisfy any of the master's requests. The basic necessities of life, food, housing, transportation, and other aspects are also meticulously taken care of. We are all afraid of neglecting the masters. So how can we talk about suffering humiliation? I ask Your Majesty the Dwarf King to consider the good relationship between our two countries for many years and reconsider. It is not worth it to go to war with my Snow Wind Empire for a few irrelevant people. You humans have a saying, if you are not free, you would rather die. Whether they have been wronged or not, they know in their hearts. Their justice is naturally up to the Dwarf Empire to seek justice for them. Also, those people are not irrelevant people. They are the benefactors of the Dwarf Clan, and the Dwarf Clan owes them a favor. The Dwarf Clan is not like you humans. We will not be able to learn how to repay kindness with enmity even after 10,000 years. If we really hand over those people, then there is no need for the dwarves to live on the continent. It would be better for us to collectively slit our own throats. The Dwarf King said. The emissary bowed deeply and said, Your Majesty the Dwarf King, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but the power that my king has dispatched this time even makes me feel a little scared. The Dwarf Kingdom really has no chance of winning. As long as you hand over those people, my king guarantees that he will not send a single soldier into the Dwarf Kingdom. Enough. The ones who protect the safety of the kingdom are the soldiers of the kingdom, not the promises of the enemy. It is better to die in glory than to live in dishonor. The Dwarf King said. The emissary stood up and said, Dwarf King, have you really made up your mind? Yes. You don't want to think about it anymore. No need. So, the negotiation is broken down? Yes. The emissary said with a glimmer of hope. Can you allow me to go back and report to the Iron Blood King? The Dwarf King stood up and looked at the human emissary who was still calm in front of him, and said, When the Iron Blood King sees your head, he will naturally understand. The emissary shook his head and said with a wry smile, It's really convenient and effective. You really have the demeanor of a dwarf. Seeing that you are still so calm before your death, I think you should be someone. Then I'll tell you one more thing. Do you know where the most obvious flaw in your words is? The Dwarf King said, Please enlighten me. You always emphasize that your words are conveyed to the Iron Blood King. But with my understanding of him, in this case, it would be strange if he could say so much. The emissary was stunned, and finally sighed and said, I understand. The Dwarf King raised his hand and said, Be more nimble. A bright light flashed, and a dwarf powerhouse held a long sword and quickly cut off the head of the emissary. There was no expression of pain on the emissary's face, as if he had not realized that he had died. The top powerhouse of the dwarves, and the sword that could cut iron like mud. It was really nimble. Return the head to the Iron Blood King, the Dwarf King said. Yes. The Dwarf King walked out of the hall. The corpse of the emissary was immediately thrown into the magma by the dwarves who didn't like him. The place of the dwarves couldn't be more convenient for destroying corpses. The dwarves had been friends with humans for many years, and they had also been influenced by human culture for many years. So the Dwarf King knew what I would rather die than be free. What I would rather die in glory than live in dishonor. But the dwarves were not humans after all. They didn't know what when two armies fight, they don't kill the emissary. No matter how good their friendship was, they were not of the same race after all, and their hearts were different. Humans were like that, and so were dwarves. Chapter 46. Snow Fire Plains. The Dwarf Kingdom was located in a volcanic mountain range, bordering the Snow Wind Empire. At the border of the two countries, the colors of the land were very distinct. The Dwarf Kingdom side was a grayish-red volcanic land. The Snow Wind Empire side was naturally a boundless snowfield. The two completely opposite landforms did not have any buffer between them. The extreme cold and extreme heat clashed with each other, causing the environment to be harsh and complicated, not suitable for any living things to live in. If it was in the past, this place could be said to be 1,000 mountains with no birds, 10,000 miles without a trace. It was truly a forbidden land for living things. But today, the Snow Fire Plains had become lively. It could be said to be a boiling cauldron of voices, because the Snow Wind Empire's army was stationed here, preparing for the upcoming war. In front of the humans who were in a state of war, even the harshest weather conditions were nothing. Other living things adapted to the environment in order to survive. But humans could change the environment in order to survive. As for who was better and who was worse, who was wrong and who was right, no one could say for sure. But the only thing that was certain was that humans lived more comfortably. Your Majesty, the Dwarf King has sent back the head of our envoy, and there is a letter attached. A soldier raised the letter above his head and reported to the Iron Blood King. Head Secretary Bei Luo stood up angrily and said, Your Majesty, the Dwarf King actually did not know what was good for him. We advised him with good intentions, but he actually killed our envoy? Does he not even know the principle of not killing envoys in a war? Duke Lawrence snorted. These civil officials, they had read too many books, causing their brains to be numb. It's fine to deal with government affairs, but when it comes to the battlefield, it's still us military officers. Not killing envoys in a war? That's just a saying. Why take it seriously? Read it, Iron Blood King said. Yes. The soldier swallowed a mouthful of saliva and read. Iron Blood King, you first put our citizens under house arrest, and now you invade our borders. You are really going too far. Our Dwarf Kingdom will not submit to humiliation. In the future, when our two countries meet on the battlefield, let's fight to the death. As expected, Iron Blood King said, Your Majesty, I wonder why the Dwarf King did not mention anything about the Red Disaster. Could it be that the news wasn't fully transmitted? Bei Luo asked curiously. They have already chopped off the head of our emissary and sent it back to us. It looks like they're going to fight to the death with no way out. What else was there to say? It would only be a waste of time. Duke Lawrence said, It's either you or I. Bei Luo said expressionlessly. The Duke smiled and said, On the battlefield, it's for luck. That makes sense, said the Iron Blood King. Dare I ask your Majesty, do you want me to say that it's reasonable for the sake of auspiciousness, or do you want me to say that there's no need for me to say anything more? Bei Luo was rarely uncertain about Her Majesty's decision. Both, the Iron Blood King said. Duke Lawrence looked very proud as he smiled and said, Your Majesty, may I ask when we're going to fight? Anything is fine. You decide, the Iron Blood King said. The way I see it, why don't we set it for half a month from now? That way, our soldiers can be fully prepared, and the various factions can familiarize themselves with each other, the Duke said. Duke, although I am not good at war, I have heard that speed is the most important thing in war. Isn't half a month too long? Although our soldiers can be fully prepared, the same can be said for the enemy soldiers. Wouldn't we be missing a good opportunity? Bello said. The Duke chuckled and stomped his foot. What good opportunity? Look at our great battle array, this great commotion, and then look at these endless plains. Grand Secretary, sir, could it be that you still want to catch them off guard? Bello thought for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, I understand. Duke Lawrence thought that people who didn't understand war always wanted to win by surprise. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to show off. However, people who played tricks on the battlefield didn't play for thrills or excitement. They played with their lives. Not just their own lives, but the lives of thousands of soldiers. Yes, the Iron Blood King said. He was naturally referring to the time of the battle that Duke Lawrence mentioned. Yes, Your Majesty, Duke Lawrence said. The Iron Blood King nodded slightly. Just as the ministers were about to leave the hall, a soldier ran in and bowed. Your Majesty, the Pope requests an audience. A clear voice reverberated in the hall, accurately conveying to everyone's ears. However, there were still many people who doubted if they had heard wrongly. Noisy discussions immediately sounded in the previously solemn hall. Pope. It sounded like the title of a certain religious leader who had rotted the streets. However, in this world, there was only one person who could be called that. That was the Pope of the Church of Light. Every pope was the spokesperson of the God of light in the world. Naturally, they gathered thousands of rays of light. They shone on the entire human race. The believers of the Church of Light were all over the world, so the status of the Pope was naturally self-evident. In some areas, the Pope's power was even above the 5 great emperors of the human race. And this Pope, even among the previous popes, was an extremely outstanding one. Long ago, he had left his own thick and colorful stroke in the history books. The title of the most powerful human saint was just one of the many titles he had. However, this Pope had a small problem that could not even be considered a problem. That was, he was not like the previous popes who stayed in the Church of Light every day like an unmarried virgin who did not step out of the door. Instead, he liked to travel around the continent. According to the rumors from the Church of Light, even the internal members of the Church of Light could not see the Pope once or twice a year. Please, the Iron Blood King said. The soldier who sent the message hurriedly ran out. At this time, everyone present did not go out anymore. They stood there with their chests puffed out, solemnly not saying a word, accompanying their Majesty to welcome the Pope. The Snow Wind Empire and the Church of Light had a serious historical problem. Although the Snow Wind Empire had changed from relying on the power of the witches to the power of the dwarves' technology and was no longer hostile to the Church of Light. However, the relationship between the two parties could not be described as good. The Duke looked at Beiluo. Beiluo did say that the Saimai Empire sent a team of about 1,000 high-ranking bishops to help. They were led by the top echelon of the church. However, he did not expect that the highest level was really the highest level, holding up the sky. No matter how dangerous the situation was, the Pope should not have personally led a team and come here to drink the wind and snow. Beiluo noticed the Duke's gaze. He shook his head slightly to show that he did not expect it either. The Iron Blood King stood at a high place and saw the secret scene below. He felt that it was interesting that the leaders of the two camps under him had such a tacit understanding. It seemed that the person who understood you the most was often your enemy. This sentence was quite accurate. His Majesty the Pope has arrived. A loud announcement came from outside the door. As soon as the announcement was made, the door was opened. The Pope, who was wearing a luxurious white robe with golden edges, slowly walked in with a few followers. The hall was instantly filled with gasps of surprise. No one expected the Pope to be so young. They thought that he would be a kind-looking old man. They did not expect him to be a young man who looked around 26 or 27 years old. He had a tall figure and a handsome face. If there was anything in common between him and the Pope that everyone imagined, it would be his silver white hair. Iron Blood King. The Pope nodded slightly. Your Majesty the Pope, may I know why you have personally come? The Iron Blood King asked. The conversation between the Iron Blood King and the Pope, other than the 4 emperors who were far away, no one else was qualified to interrupt. Therefore, the Iron Blood King could only say more, just like during the meeting of the emperors. The Pope smiled bitterly. I am ashamed to say that I have been the Pope for more than 100 years, but I have rarely fulfilled my responsibilities as the Pope. Thanks to the help of my companions, there was no trouble. The Pope has the duty to protect the Radiant Church. However, I often go out. 2 years ago, the Red Disaster took advantage of my absence and overturned my good friend's palace. This matter is also my responsibility. Now that I heard that the Red Disaster appeared in the Snow Wind Empire, I came to see if there is any opportunity to make up for my mistakes. The Iron Blood King said, Your Majesty the Pope, you are exaggerating. Chapter 47. The Pope shook his head. Iron Blood King doesn't need to comfort me. A dereliction of duty is a dereliction of duty. I have my own judgment. The Iron Blood King nodded, no longer trying to persuade him. No matter what the Pope thought or did, no one could interfere. I heard that the conditions we proposed were rejected by the other side, and the Snow Wind Empire wants to go to war with the dwarves? The Pope asked. The Dwarf King thinks that the Red Disaster has helped the dwarves. Wanting the dwarves to hand over their benefactor is tantamount to a fool's dream. The Iron Blood King said. So, the war is unavoidable. The Pope asked. It is not my wish, but must be done. The Iron Blood King said. In that case, please understand. The forces of the Church of Light will not help you fight the dwarves. We will only be enemies with the Red Disaster. Of course, if the soldiers of the Snow Wind Empire need treatment, we will not hesitate to help. After all, this is our job. The Pope said. Everyone was silent. No one would have thought that the Pope would say that he would not fight with the Allies at such a critical moment. This was undoubtedly a huge weakening of the Snow Wind Empire. To a certain extent, the Pope's decision could be regarded as a deserter. If it was someone else, they would have been immediately dealt with by military law. But it was clear that the Pope could not do this. Everyone present understood. So everyone was waiting to see the Iron Blood King's reaction. Even Grand Secretary Bay Luo and Duke Lawrence couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. They were afraid that the Iron Blood King would do something shocking, but expected. Just by looking at the word Iron Blood in front of the Iron Blood King, one could imagine what kind of style the Snow Wind Empire's imperial family had. Those who truly angered the Iron Blood King would know what it meant to integrate the snow into one's bloodline. Yes, the Iron Blood King slowly nodded. Long sighs of relief could be heard in the hall. It was great that they did not hear His Majesty say, "Capture the Pope and behead him in 3 days." The Pope suddenly revealed a stunning smile. Even he did not think that the Iron Blood King would agree so easily. No matter what, this matter was a blow to the Iron Blood King's prestige. It seemed that the current Iron Blood King was indeed a powerful person. The Pope thought to himself. The Pope nodded slightly and led the group of people from the Church of Light out of the door. The atmosphere in the room gradually became lighter as the Pope walked out. However, the Pope stopped in his tracks without warning and stood with his back facing the crowd. The atmosphere suddenly froze. I forgot to tell the Iron Blood King that if the dwarves need treatment, we won't ignore it either, the Pope said. Everyone was dumbfounded, arrogant and insatiable. This was probably what everyone was thinking. You even want to treat the enemy's wounded? Did you really come all the way from the Simai Empire to the Snow Wind Empire to help? Was he here to pick a fight? This time, even the bishops of the Church of Light felt that their Pope had gone too far. Everyone was observing the Iron Blood King's expression. At this moment, everyone finally realized what it meant to be expressionless. There was no expression on the Iron Blood King's face, neither happy nor sad. But everyone thought it was the calm before the storm. The calmer was now, the more intense it would be later. Duke Lawrence had even made mental preparations and future battle plans. Let's put aside the dwarves for now and not fight this battle. After killing the Pope, the pressure that would follow would not be small. So he should preserve his strength. Grand Secretary Bello was sweating like rain, and his eyes were like vultures, turning sharply, changing his previous gentle image. That's how it should be. No one thought that the Iron Blood King would say this. The Pope's shoulders dropped a little, and he said, "Thank you for your understanding." After the Pope left, everyone left one after another. It was estimated that today's situation was enough for them to digest and sort out for a while. Only the Duke and the Grand Secretary were left in the hall. Duke Lawrence stood solemnly, looking at the Iron Blood King with eager eyes. He thought that His Majesty was just considering that it was inconvenient to kill the Pope in public, so he was so easy to talk to. Now, he was waiting for His Majesty's order. The order to secretly kill the Pope. This task, regardless of whether it was successful or not, even if he had to pay with his life. It was enough for him to leave a page of his own in any history book. Grand Secretary Bello saw through the Duke's undisguised thoughts in the blink of an eye. He only felt that this person was very smart one moment and extremely stupid the next. It was really hard to understand. In the whole world, Who would dare to have ideas about the Pope? Your Majesty, why is the Pope acting so strangely? Bello asked. The Iron Blood King shook his head slightly and said, It's normal. Could it be that the Pope's actions today are all within your Majesty's expectations? Bello asked. The Iron Blood King nodded slightly. Then why is your Majesty frowning? Bello asked. The real reason why the Pope came personally. The center of this war was undoubtedly Jilin, and this would be the first real confrontation between humans and Jilin. But in the long-term plan of humans, this was just a contact battle to test the enemy's strength. No human emperor, including the Iron Blood King, had thought of this. They could directly kill Jilin in this battle, and it was just a greeting. After all, it was the human way to prepare for the worst and leave a backup plan everywhere. Since this was the case, with the Iron Blood King personally overseeing this battle, there was no need for the Pope to come again. The Pope came personally, so there must be something hidden. Seeing that His Majesty really did not have the intention to kill the Pope, the Duke could only let it go. Thinking of the Pope's young face and dazzling white hair, he asked curiously, The Pope is really young. The Iron Blood King could not help but smile slightly. Bello said, It seems that the Duke is really not familiar with the Holy Church of Light. Are you familiar with it? Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Go ahead. As far as I know, the Church of Light has not held a Pope succession ceremony for more than 100 years. In other words, this Pope is already over 100 years old. As for why he did not age, the Church of Light naturally said that it was a miracle of the God of Light, Bello said. Over 100 years old, but not old? The Duke immediately thought of a similar person. The Church of Light's absolute enemy, Aisha. A miracle of the God of Light? That might not be the case. Wait, the Duke suddenly said. What? The Iron Blood King asked. I suddenly found something strange, and that is, since the Pope appeared, he has never mentioned the God of Light, the Duke said. Bello also suddenly realized and said, That is true. The whole continent knew that even a small priest in the Church of Light would not leave the God of Light out of 3 sentences. However, the Pope had said so much in public without mentioning the God of Light. No matter what, this did not make sense. It was really puzzling. The Dwarf Kingdom. Where are you going? Are you not eating? When are you going to make that stove for me? Jilin looked at Aisha, who was hurrying out, and asked curiously. Aisha did not turn her head and said, To see a friend. Jilin followed behind Aisha. You have friends? Nonsense. Chapter 48. Aisha said that Jilin's question was nonsense. But in fact, it was not nonsense at all. Although Aisha looked youthful and beautiful, her age must have long surpassed any normal human grandmother in this world. Who could be friends with her, other than a non-human creature like Jilin, who could accompany her for a long life? If it was a normal 100-year-old old man, on a quiet afternoon, holding a cup of tea in his hand, he would call his children and grandchildren. He would tell his children and grandchildren that he wanted to see a friend or something. Then his children and grandchildren would not prepare a carriage, but would directly prepare for his funeral. For a person who was more than 100 years old, to humans who were 80 years old, this was an age where one more day was worth one more day of living. No matter which day he died, it would not be strange. His children and grandchildren would not even shed tears at the funeral. This kind of person, it would be difficult to have any friends living in this world. If he said that he wanted to visit a friend, it was not that he wanted to go out for a walk, but that he was tired of living. But looking at Aisha's state, it was obviously not the case. Jilin knew how much Aisha cherished her life. People who thought that they had unfulfilled ambitions always cherished their lives so much. Although Jilin found it strange, he did not ask much. Aisha took out a broom and flew out. She did not directly open a teleportation formation like usual. This was very strange. The night in the Snow Wind Empire was always so beautiful. The ground was covered in silver, and the night sky was clear. The stars were bright like sapphires dotted on a black cloth. The bright moonlight, after touching the white snow, made the whole ground bright. Quiet, beautiful. However, there was a person standing in the middle of the clean and tidy snowy ground. He was dressed in white, and he had white hair. Standing in the snow, he seemed to have merged with the snow. Looking up at the starry sky, he was handsome and elegant. There were no footprints around him, as if he had appeared here out of thin air. Or he had stood here for an extremely long time, long enough for the wind and snow to cover the traces of his arrival. Then he stood here, and during this time, he did not move a single step. Quietly, a figure streaked across the night sky. If the young man in white blended into the snow, then the young lady flying in the sky blended into the night. Cloaked in darkness, he swept across the sky full of stars. The black-clothed girl nimbly descended in front of the white-clothed youth. At the same time, it seemed to bring down some darkness. "You're here," the white-haired young man said. From a moment the black girl's figure appeared in his line of sight, his gaze had never left her. It turned out that the young man was not looking up at the starry sky when he raised his head. Instead, he had been waiting for her to appear. He only hoped that he could catch a glimpse of her as soon as possible, so he kept looking around and looking forward to it. "Nonsense," the black-haired girl said. The young man in white didn't seem to mind at all. He smiled and said, "All these years, I've been traveling the continent. Everyone thinks that I'm saving the world, but I've actually been looking for you. You should know that." "Looking for me? What are you trying to do? What can you do?" the girl in black asked. "I don't know. Since that's the case, I might as well not meet him. You're always so smart and correct." "Of course. But if that's the case, it'll be very tiring." "What do you mean?" Aisha said. "You're different from most people. You can always find a most suitable and correct choice from many options. However, the choices of humans are often not the most correct. You're the only one sober when everyone is drunk. It's definitely not an easy task," the Pope said. "Hee, I heard that you specially brought people to help the Snow Wind Empire fight against the dwarves. But you said that you want to save the enemy in front of the two armies? It seems that you don't have it easy either." Aisha asked back. The Pope shook his head and smiled bitterly. "That's right. It's not pleasing to either side," Aisha said. "The Church of Light doesn't need to please anyone. The dwarves are not our enemy. In our view, the warriors of the Snow Wind Empire and the dwarves are the same. The sun should bless all living beings, regardless of who they are," the Pope said. "Oh, you're much more domineering than when you were young. You've changed a lot," Aisha said. "More than 100 years have passed in a hurry. There are few things in the world that haven't changed, and people are the same." The Pope said, "Change and change, but it's always the same. There's nothing new." Aisha said, "Of course you and I are qualified to say that. After living for a long time, naturally I've seen everything, and there's nothing new." The Pope said, "But your biggest change is that you don't always mention your God of Light." Aisha felt strange. No wonder Aisha felt strange. It's really the biggest characteristic of the Church of Light to mention the God of Light. It's as if you don't say it dozens of times a day, it's disrespectful to the God of Light. Not to mention the Pope. Aisha thought that the Pope's first sentence after meeting would be something like, "God of Light is above." The Pope's expression was slightly dim. "I also believed in the God of Light. I believe that the glory of the God of Light is like the sun, always surrounding the world. So I also piously prayed to the God of Light when I was confused, hoping that God could guide me. But at that time, I only felt that the light seemed to have left me, and I could only wander alone in the darkness. As the Pope, I don't even need to think about the rest of the world, since the light of God is after all illusory and not worth relying on. Then, it's better for me to do it." Aisha immediately understood. A person who wanted to replace God and become the embodiment of light to illuminate the world naturally wouldn't talk about God. Aisha didn't know what to say, so she said, "I didn't come to you to listen to you. I haven't changed for so many years. I'm too lazy to wallow in the mire with those stupid people." "That's true. You refused to see me for so many years. Why did you take the initiative to come here this time?" The Pope said, "I hope you can leave the Snow Wind Empire as soon as possible." Aisha said, "Why? Is it because of the Megalosaurus partner who destroyed the palace with you?" The Pope said, "He is different from the poison dragon you killed. If you become his enemy, you will really die." Aisha said seriously, "You don't want me to die?" The Pope was really surprised this time. He always thought that if Aisha had the chance, she would not hesitate to kill him. Once upon a time, he was indebted to Aisha, but later, he became the key figure in the Church of Light's victory over the witches. This was also an important reason why he became the Pope. On the other hand, from Aisha's point of view, he was also the main culprit in the destruction of the witches. In this world, it was not so easy to distinguish between light and dark, right and wrong. It was more about different standpoints and different camps. In any case, the only people left in that era are you and me. The only person I can call a friend is you. Naturally, I don't want you to die. Aisha was a little lonely. Humans always needed to rely on each other, not just physically. If there really came a day when there were only 2 humans left in the world, then the 2 of them would definitely let go of their hatred for each other. Aisha was the same. That's right. The only traces left in that era are the 2 of us. The Pope said, if the 2 of us die, who will remember the people in our era? At that time, this world will completely turn over. Aisha said, maybe we should have turned over a long time ago. Our story should be left for future generations to write. Since ancient times, it has always been so. The Pope said, are you tired of living? Aisha asked seriously. A little. The Pope answered seriously. Chapter 49. The Pope said that he was tired of living. Aisha was not surprised at all. To be honest, she was a little surprised too. The saint said that at 15 years old, he was determined to learn. At 30, he stood up. At 40, he was not confused. At 50, he knew his destiny. At 60, he was obedient. And at 70, he followed his heart. According to the saint, when he lived to 50, he knew his destiny and was no longer afraid of death. We mortals, although we can't reach the level of the saint, but when we live to 70 or 80, most of us can know our destiny. For people like Aisha and the Pope, who were still alive over 100 years old, it was normal for them to feel tired of living. Perhaps people can instinctively feel tired of this world, which is one of the few gentleness this world has for humans. Otherwise, wouldn't death be more terrifying and sad? The Pope said, so you're not leaving? Aisha ignored the Pope's melancholy and went straight to the point. Aisha knew that although this person no longer talked about God, he was still the most successful charlatan in the world. It was already instinctive for him to say things that seemed to be very profound. If she followed his topic, she might be able to go all the way to the birth of the world. I can't leave, and there's no need to. Look at me, my hair is all white, and there are not many people or things in this world that I care about, except for you. The Pope said. Aisha's expression changed slightly. She took a few steps forward, held the Pope's face with both hands, and carefully looked at his white hair. Surprisingly, the Pope was not on guard at all and allowed Aisha to pull his face. He just took half a step back slightly. Aisha's lips moved a few times, but she stopped. He was different from her. After all, she was a direct contractor of the dark grimoire. But he had the aura of light that the dark grimoire disliked the most. The same magic ritual, but the effect was completely different. It was as if time had stopped on her, but he only maintained a youthful appearance and delayed aging. Even his white hair and beard did not change. Although the young man's face, with a head of white hair, was actually quite good-looking, especially the Pope, who had practiced the great light for many years. Every single strand of white hair was sparkling and pure white, brimming with vitality. It was unlike an ordinary old man who looked lethargic. However, he was old after all. Of course, so was she. In the end, Aisha just sighed, put down her hands, and took 2 steps back. Then I won't persuade you. The Pope nodded slightly. Yes, I'm leaving. Yes. Goodbye. Yes. Aisha flew away. Without the darkness of the night, the snowy ground became white again. It looked unusually harmonious, but also unusually boring. The Pope took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. He still felt a little lost. Even after so many years, he still couldn't let it go. Could it really be like what Tiff said, that this was the only thing he could do in this lifetime? Was he going to be completely dominated by Aisha? Actually, that wasn't a bad idea. Unknowingly, Tiff had been gone for a long time. It was really a long time. No one knew how many secrets were hidden in the night under the moonlight. Who would have known that in such an ordinary snowfield, Aisha would actually meet with the Pope? Two people who should have been life and death enemies, who should have decided life and death upon meeting, were actually chatting happily? It was estimated that once this matter was spread out, it would definitely set off a big storm. With Aisha's departure, the Pope's teleportation technique could be used. The Pope was like a swarm of fireflies taking off. His body turned into many spots of light and disappeared. The traces of the two people on the snowy ground were eventually covered by the wind and snow. No one would ever know that the two of them had met here in secret. At least the Pope thought so. In the mobile city of the Snow Wind Empire, in the area specially designated for the Church of Light, suddenly, countless spots of light gathered on the chair, gradually forming a huge human-shaped light cluster. The light dissipated, and it was the Pope sitting on the chair. The Pope calmed down and found that in the room where no one should be, there was a person staring at him with a faint smile. The Pope said with a guilty conscience, "Lord, what are you doing here?" Lord was an orphan picked up by the Pope when he was about 40 years old when he was traveling the continent. In an orphanage under the name of the Church of Light, he was chosen by the Pope at first glance. Later, time indeed proved that the Pope's vision was excellent. Lord quickly displayed his extremely high cultivation talent. He was especially compatible with the Great Light technique. And perhaps because he had suffered too much before he met the Pope, the child was extremely sensible from a young age. When he grew up, he was even more honest and kind to people. The people around him were full of praises. His Majesty the Pope even treated him as his own son. Naturally, when Lord grew up, he was elected as the Pope's successor. After this Pope went to see the God of Light, he would definitely be the next Pope. But no one expected that Lord, as the Pope in waiting, would be the Pope for more than 50 years. Lord was already old, but the Pope was actually not dead yet. Lord, as the Pope in waiting, was truly shocking. According to the customs of the Middle Empire, Lord had been the crown prince for so many years, so it was natural for him to rebel and usurp the throne. When Lord was first elected as the Pope in waiting, everyone thought highly of him. When he had been the Pope in waiting for more than 10 years, the princes of the Middle Empire said that this man was too good at enduring. If they were in his shoes, they would not have been able to endure all these years. He was a man who could do great things. They thought that once he made a move, he would be able to amaze the world. When he had been the Pope in waiting for more than 20 years, the princes said that Lord was about to become a pervert from holding it in. When he had been the Pope in waiting for 30 years, the current Golden King had already taken care of him. Many of his brothers had ousted his father, and he had successfully taken the throne. When he was full of himself, he would occasionally think of Lord and say contemptuously, "Humph, gutless rat, soft-hearted woman." Until now, Lord had been the Pope for more than 50 years, and nothing major had happened to the Church of Light. Whenever the Golden King dealt with government affairs until late at night, he would think of Lord under the candlelight and sigh softly. He would think that Lord was really a saint. "I'm not as good as him." The world only knew that Lord had been the Pope in waiting for a long time, but they did not know that Lord had long taken over the power of the Pope. As long as the Pope was not in the Church of Light, Lord had the final say in all matters of the Church of Light. The Pope's time in the Church of Light could only be counted on one hand once or twice a year. "What am I doing here?" "Of course, I am waiting for your holiness." Lord bowed slightly and said with a smile in his eyes. The Pope felt a little guilty when he saw Lord smile. He asked timidly, "What are you waiting for me for?" "The Church has something to ask your holiness," Lord said. The Pope felt strange and said, "All these years, haven't you been handling all the matters of the Church? Why are you asking me? I don't know anything." Lord was infuriated by the Pope's self-righteous attitude. No matter what, he was still a man in his 80s. This time, he was so angry that he almost fainted. He could only raise a trembling finger and say, "Shameless! Oh, God of Light, why did you put me in such a situation?" The Pope was stunned. He knocked on the table and said, "What are you talking about? Who talks about their foster father like that? Besides, I am training you, and giving you a chance to improve yourself. Don't be ungrateful, young man." Lord's snow-white beard moved without wind. He was obviously very angry, but he had no choice. Although he was in his 80s, if the Pope wanted to call him a young man, he could only pinch his nose and accept it. First, he was raised by the Pope. Second, the Pope was really 30 years older than him. So Lord could only ignore the Pope's address and said, "You raised me? You already said that 50 or 60 years ago. Do I need you to raise me now? As the Pope, do you know that we reorganized the doctrine 30 years ago?" "I know." The Pope's gaze was a little evasive. Lord said with disdain, "Oh, I didn't expect your holiness to be so concerned about the church's affairs after being away for so many years." "Very well, your holiness, please enlighten me. What is the 34th doctrine?" The Pope was shocked. "Are you testing me?" Lord said calmly, "That's right." The Pope said angrily, "Did you wait for me today for this? You're being unreasonable. If there's nothing else, you can leave." Of course, Lord didn't leave. He just quietly looked at the Pope. The Pope's expression finally showed a hint of awkwardness. He said angrily, "All right, what do you want? Just say it." "I already said that the church has something to ask your holiness," Lord said. "Go ahead. May I ask your holiness, is the person you saw tonight the witch Aisha?" Lord asked. "That's right." "Then how is the saintess?" "Saintess? Who?" Lord finally couldn't hold himself back and said, "Your holiness, Staya is the eldest daughter of the sacred king. She was elected as the saintess 2 years ago. However, she was kidnapped by Aisha and the Red Disaster. I've already told you about this." The Pope rolled his eyes and remembered that there was indeed such a thing. "You didn't ask?" Lord seemed to have understood something from the Pope's expression. The Pope nodded. Can't you be a little more mature? As soon as you saw that witch, you forgot everything. No matter what, you're still the Pope. Staya is the saintess of our church. Now that she's been kidnapped, we don't even know if she's dead or alive. You're only thinking about picking up girls?" Lord said. The Pope thought to himself, "I'm not picking up girls. We're already more than 100 years old. At most, we're just gathering together to reminisce about the not-so-wonderful years. What's more, I can't remember anything when I see Elsa. I can't control it. How can you blame me? Lord, this child, when he was young, he was very respectful to me and listened to everything I said. Now, he's not as obedient as he was when he was young. Didn't I just throw the Pope's job to him for a few decades? And he's still angry? How unfilial." Chapter 50. Although the Pope cursed in his heart, he still put on an expression of humility on his face. Ever since Lord took over the Pope's affairs, the Pope became more and more diffident when facing Lord. Seeing the Pope like this, Lord sighed in disappointment and said, "There's one more thing." The Pope nodded repeatedly, looking like he was listening. "I'm already old. The Church suggested that we find another candidate for the position of Pope, which is the Son of God," Lord said. The Pope was stunned. He looked at the child in front of him again. His body was already slightly hunched, and his hair and beard were all white like his own. Unknowingly, he was already so old. This thing always passes so quietly. Every time we just realized that a period of time had passed, it had already left us. Suddenly looking back, it was like a dream. The Pope thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, won't we have 2 sons of God? The Pope and the Son of God can't retire. I can't give the position to you. You don't have to worry about that, Your Holiness. We can't let Your Holiness give up the position," Lord said. "Then what's the problem?" the Pope asked. "The problem is, no one wants to be the Son of God." The Pope was puzzled. "How can that be? I remember that this position used to be very popular." Lord pointed at himself and looked at the Pope. Who would be willing to repeat the same mistake? The Pope took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. "Then what should we do? We can't just find someone to do this." "But why is it so urgent to find a successor? I'm already over 80 years old. The elders are afraid. If one day you and I die on the same day, month and year, won't the church be in chaos?" The Pope said anxiously, "Bah, what nonsense are you talking about? Tell the elders that I can at least live for a few more years. Tell them not to worry. This matter can be put aside for now." Lord thought to himself, "It's because of this that no one wants to be the Son of God." Aisha returned to the Dwarf Kingdom. Compared to the Pope, Aisha left without hesitation. He had already told the other party about the severity of the matter. Since he was so stubborn, then no matter what the outcome was, it was his own choice. One of the rules of the Red Dragon Palace was not to stop people who wanted to die. But if it was convenient, he could give them a ride. There were tens of thousands of ways to die in the world, but the only way to die was to seek one's own death. Everyone only had one life, no matter how long it was. What other people wanted to do was their business. Ah, you're back. Jilin looked like he had been waiting for a long time. Yes. What can I do for you? You met a friend? Didn't we talk about the forging furnace last time? Jilin asked. I can help you with a forging furnace, but you have to promise me one thing, Aisha said. You really have friends. Tell me, what's the matter? I was already mentally prepared. I knew you wouldn't help me for free. Let me say this first, my scales won't do. I know you've been coveting them for a long time, but I really can't give them to you, Jilin said. I hope that if you have to help the dwarves fight, please don't kill a single person, Aisha said. Jilin tilted his head back slightly and narrowed his eyes. He looked a little funny in his human form, but if he was in his dragon form, this action represented vigilance, suspicion, and even shock. Jilin really didn't expect that Aisha would make such a request. This was not in line with Aisha's usual style. If it was Bane, it would be easy to understand. If it was Staya, it would be even more logical. Aisha's was a little suspicious. Aisha would understand how much Jilin's promise could bring. Aisha, as an absolute materialistic person, would not make such a decision, unless that person could bring more benefits to Aisha than his promise. Then who was it? Jilin was a little curious. Aisha saw that Jilin was thinking, and suddenly had a bad premonition in her heart. She hurriedly said, So do you agree? Of course, but what does that person look like? I have to remember it well. Otherwise, when there are too many humans, it won't be good if I get mixed up. Aisha took out a crystal, and the clear head of the Pope was projected from the crystal. Don't care if other people want to die. Life was everyone's own. Others could play with it however they wanted. In the end, words were words, and actions were actions. Knowing was one thing. How to do it was another thing. Principles were always easy to know, but difficult to do. Everyone knew the principles, but who could really combine knowledge and action? If they could really do it, then wouldn't they become a saint after reading the Analects once? How could it be so easy? Jilin looked at it and nodded slightly. He seemed to have remembered it. Aisha put away the crystal. After living with Jilin for a long time, she knew that the ability to have a photographic memory was a talent among humans, but it was not worth mentioning in the dragon race. As long as Jilin wanted to, he would never forget what he saw, not to mention a human face. The difference in the level of life was the most difficult to overcome. But Jilin raised his head and asked Aisha in surprise, Why did you put it away? Aisha also felt strange and said, Why? You didn't remember it? I remembered it, but I can't guarantee that I won't mix it up with others. Jilin said, Why? Aisha didn't quite understand. Why? I'll give you a picture of a snow hound for you to see. Can you guarantee that you will find the one I showed you among more than 10,000 dogs? Jilin said, What are you talking about? Even Aisha, who did not consider herself a human, could not bear to listen to it. These words were really unpleasant to hear. Jilin waved his hands and said, Don't get angry. I don't mean to look down on humans alone. Aisha thought, You really don't look down on humans alone. You just look down on all creatures except the dragon race. Don't you think so? Humans are even more featureless than dogs. There are many types of dogs. What about humans? Their facial features are all the same, and their body shapes are also roughly the same in the eyes of the dragon race. In terms of appearance, the biggest difference between people was probably the clothes they wore. However, even though their faces were made up of similar things and only had slight differences, humans were able to clearly differentiate between beauty and ugliness. The most beautiful and the ugliest seem to be separated by a world. It's really boring. But the most admirable thing should be the God that humans call God. Billions of creatures that are similar, but none of them are the same. What a powerful guy. Jilin sighed. Aisha expressed that she did not want to talk. There was nothing to talk about with a creature that looked no different from looking at dogs. But since Jilin mentioned God, then Aisha had to say, now when humans talk about God, they mostly refer to the god of light. Jilin wondered, is that so? I didn't expect the god of light to be so creative. Why haven't I heard from my dad? Jilin took Aisha to the Dwarf King's forging room. Hundreds of dwarves, including the Dwarf King, looked serious and were ready to fight. The Dwarf King said to Aisha, before we start, let me make it clear. If it weren't for the fact that there was no other way and that time was tight, we dwarves would never have borrowed the power of the witches. So we won't accept your kindness. The dwarves had replaced the witches on the world stage. Naturally, they did not want to bow to the former losers. Of course, the same was true for the witches. No matter who it was, they would not be in a good mood when they found out that they had been replaced. You don't need to accept my kindness. I have already received my reward. Taking money to do things, this is the way of the witches. Aisha said. Then let's start. The Dwarf King said in a muffled voice. Aisha nodded gently. With a flash of purple light in her hand, a black dagger with a cold light appeared in Aisha's hand. Aisha did not hesitate to stab the dagger to the side. The sharp tip of the dagger fell on Jilin's forearm. Of course, it did not pierce. The audience was in an uproar. However, Jilin was very calm. His expression did not change as he asked Aisha, "What are you doing?" Aisha smiled and said, "I thought I could stab you in this state if you were unguarded. The blood refining method naturally needs blood. But you can't stab me like this. What if you really make me bleed? You are playing with your life." Jilin said, "I just want a drop of your blood, and you want to kill me?" Aisha shouted, "Didn't I say it when I was in the Saimai Empire? If a dragon drops blood, it must pay with its life." Jilin said seriously, "Didn't you just say that to show off?" Aisha was shocked. "Of course not. This is the clan rule. You have clan rules? Of course. For example, you're not allowed to eat people casually? No. It's probably that I have to kill whoever dares to hit me. If someone of the same clan is bullied, I have to help them. The most important thing is that people of the same clan are not allowed to kill each other. That's all." Jilin said, "That's really good. What about the blood refining method?" Aisha asked. "I'll do it myself." Red raised his hand and slowly condensed a drop of golden blood from the tip of his index finger. The moment the drop of blood appeared, everyone only felt a burst of heat coming over them. Even the dwarves who lived under volcanoes all year round could not help but raise their arms in front of them. Seeing this, Aisha walked to the forging furnace and began to draw a magic circle. "Get ready," the Dwarf King shouted. Carts of or were pulled out, and the whole forging room suddenly became dazzling. Jilin's eyes were a little dazed. In a flash, he came back to his senses and shook his head fiercely. It was the dragon's damn greedy instinct again. "Drop the blood into the magic circle," Aisha shouted. Jilin waved his finger, and the blood accurately fell into the magic circle. The magic circle instantly turned golden red. The forging furnace was the same. Aisha shook her head slightly and said, "Your strength is still beyond my expectations. Your blood is too strong. The forging furnace can't withstand it. It can only be used once." Jilin turned his head to look at the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King shouted fiercely, "That's enough. There's only enough time for one chance. We will definitely send the weapon to our benefactor before the war begins. We will succeed. Is that so?" "Huh." All the dwarves shouted. There was no urgency in their voices. There was only the passion to forge an unprecedented artifact. Chapter 51. Jilin sat in front of the golden red forging furnace and put his hand on the furnace wall to heat it up. Unlike before, this time Jilin couldn't melt the forging furnace even if he used all his firepower. In Jilin's mind, the forging furnace seemed to have become an avatar of himself. Even if the temperature of his dragon flame was higher, it wouldn't be damaged in the slightest. The witch's means are really amazing, everyone thought in their hearts. The Dwarf King didn't want to be outdone. He pulled a cart of gems in front of Jilin and showed them one by one. "Benefactor, look, this transparent one is the hardest among all the ores. This white one is the toughest. This red one is the highest grade material for making magic props. This gold and silver one can make a weapon bigger or smaller at will. It's the most amazing. This one, Jilin couldn't help but nod his head repeatedly. He almost accidentally drooled. Amazing, amazing. But do you really want to give all these to me? Jilin asked carefully with his remaining reason. Aisha looked at Jilin's worried expression. She estimated that if the Dwarf King suddenly wanted to go back on his word now, Jilin would turn hostile on the spot. Fortunately, the Dwarf King didn't have the habit of suddenly changing his mind. The integrity of the dwarves was trustworthy, which humans couldn't compare at all. Humans would treat deceiving others as a manifestation of their wisdom. The Dwarf King sighed and said, "We couldn't use these gems at all in the past. We could only put them in the treasure room and let them be covered by dust. Is there anything more cruel than this? In my opinion, these precious gems shouldn't have such a lonely fate. They should become the weapons of the strong, create their own legends in the future, and pass down the legend of the dwarves. Now only you can help the dwarves achieve their long-cherished wish, and let these gems play their original value. We will naturally cherish and make good use of this opportunity. Moreover, after this war, whether the dwarves can survive or not is uncertain. If these things are kept, there may be no chance to use them. Then why don't you leave and you know that you are no match for them? Humans can't survive in this volcanic cave for a long time. As long as the humans leave, you can come back here without any effort. Why fight against humans?" Jilin asked. In his opinion, seeking advantages and avoiding disadvantages was the way for weak creatures to survive. If you are an enemy of humans, it will be the same no matter where you go, because they are everywhere. We can't leave either. This is the ancestral land of the dwarves. If we leave here, the ancestors of the dwarves will be shamed. The dwarves could not stand such insults. Moreover, we haven't really fought yet. It's still unknown who will emerge victorious, the Dwarf King said. You're ambitious. Is this what the humans mean when they say that it's better to die in glory than live in dishonor? Jilin asked. Perhaps, although humans rarely do that. A lot of their words are just empty words. That's why humans were able to overcome so many calamities and survive until now. That makes sense. Ha ha. The Dwarf King and Jilin looked at each other and smiled. 3 days later, the human camp was preparing for the war. Although things were complicated, the entire human camp was still in order. From this, one could see the military capabilities of the human commander, Duke Lawrence. The people on the ground were busy. Although it was a world of ice and snow, it was in full swing. Looking at the sweat rising from the brawny man's body, it was enough to make people forget the never-ending winter of the Snow-Wind Empire. The Pope and the Iron Blood King stood on the tower in the mobile city, looking into the distance. Naturally, it was lonely at the top. The strong wind at the top was mixed with the knife-like snowflakes, blowing the Pope's white robe and the Iron Blood King's scarlet cloak. Fluttering sounds could be heard. Although the two human leaders were together, they did not talk, nor did they look at each other. They just looked at the sky of the Dwarf Kingdom, unable to take their eyes off of it. It was as if there was a red megalosaurus flying and circling there, letting out a ferocious roar. The Iron Blood King was anticipating and calculating every situation and every possibility of the upcoming battlefield. His brows were furrowed, and his expression was heavy. The general's aura would not change even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. It was not that he was slow to react, but that he had already anticipated all the possible situations. No matter what happened, it was not worth making a fuss about. Of course, this was just an exaggeration. If a general encountered a situation like Mount Tai collapsing in front of him, even if he was a general, even if he did not lose his head out of fear, he would probably be like Prime Minister Zhuge and sigh, "Man proposes, God disposes." It was really, why is the heavens so mean to me? The Pope was also frowning. Under the platinum saint robe, his aura was enough to be on par with the Iron Blood King. It was not that the Pope was calculating something. It was just that the Pope felt that the atmosphere would easily become awkward if he was the only one chattering about something while the two of them were standing here. He knew that it was too much to ask the Iron Blood King to chat with him. Thus, he could only keep his mouth shut. Fortunately, the white clouds of the Snow-Wind Empire were very beautiful. It did not make him feel bored. Fortunately, The two human emperors standing side by side in the snow and wind and silence was also very beautiful. It did not make others feel that the two of them were bored. Dwarf Kingdom. Slow down, lower the temperature. You have already vaporized one of these ores. This is the last one. Very good, put one down. The Dwarf King said carefully. It was as if the volume was slightly louder, it would disturb the melting solution and cause the forging to fail. Following the Dwarf King's words, Jilin adjusted the temperature of the flame bit by bit. It melted and merged with the ores in the furnace. From time to time, new gems were thrown in. Your Majesty, the mold has been created. Sam said, very good, we're almost done here. Get excited, Sam. A weapon like no other in history will soon be in our hands. No, it will be in the hands of this generation of dwarves. The Dwarf King grinned. The Dwarf King did not care about the upcoming war. He was anticipating the godly weapon that was about to be completed. He felt that even if the dwarf race was exterminated, he could still hold his head high and drink with the previous kings in the divine palace of the Forge God. Everyone present felt the same way. This was because the people in this room were the dwarves who were the most talented and obsessed with forging. But the people outside the room naturally did not think so. They had already begun to make weapons, cannons, energy guns. There was also the only one unique to the dwarf race, a huge cannon that could directly absorb the energy of the volcano. It was called Godslayer. The dwarves, who were about 1 meter tall, were like ants in front of the cannon that was dozens of meters tall. Of course, if it was a human, it would be the same. The dwarf race had helped the Snow Wind Empire to study Morag for decades. If the Dwarf Kingdom, as the homeland of the dwarf race, did not master this technology, then even a fool would not believe it. The Snow Wind Empire and the dwarf race had mastered the same technology, but the direction of development and utilization was completely different. The highest manifestation of the Snow Wind Empire's technology was naturally the mobile city. It was a miracle created by combining the technology of the Age of Gods with the construction technology the humans were best at. And the highest masterpiece of the dwarf race's forging technology and the technology of the Age of Gods was the Godslayer cannon. The mobile city had a wide range of uses, and it was not limited to the battlefield. It was like most of the tools made by humans. The Godslayer cannon had a single purpose, but it was more pure. It was like the sword that the dwarf race had forged since ancient times, only for killing. Who was better and who was worse? They could only wait and see. It's finally completed. The next step is up to you. The dwarf race was relieved as he said to Aisha. In this room, there were already many dwarf masters who could not support themselves and were casually lying on the ground. These days of sleepless nights were really too tiring. But on the faces of these people lying on the ground, there was a smile from the bottom of their hearts. Some people said that being able to fight for one's dreams was the happiest thing. These dwarf masters must have thought so. A few days of sleepless nights was not a small burden for any creature, but the dragon race was definitely not in this category. Jilin was full of energy as he nodded repeatedly to the Dwarf King. It showed that he was very satisfied with this thing. Next, Aisha only needed to use the blood refining method to let Jilin have a connection with the giant sword in the process of nourishing it. The Dwarf King casually dragged up a dwarf who had fallen to the ground and carried him on his shoulder. The dwarves behind him followed suit. Those who were standing helped up those who were lying down. They followed the Dwarf King's figure and walked unsteadily, but they did not complain. It was because they had succeeded that they retreated. The door was closed, and only Aisha and Jilin were left in the forging room. The red light on the sword-casting table flickered. The Dwarf King came out of the forging room with his people. What he saw was the neat formation of the dwarf race army. There was no fighting spirit in their eyes, but they were full of expectation and inquiry. When the dwarf race was forging, everything had to be put aside, even if it was a war of life and death. The Dwarf King handed the person on his shoulder to the people behind him and clenched his fists high. Suddenly, cheers shook the sky. This represented that the forging technology of the dwarf race, which had already reached its peak, had finally taken another step forward. The dwarf race's enthusiasm for forging could be described as risking life and limb. Chapter 52. The Dwarf King looked at the cheering army with a happy and proud smile on his face. However, he knew that the army was not waiting for him just to congratulate him for creating a peerless divine weapon. So the Dwarf King waited for the crowd to gradually calm down. Then he stretched out his right hand in front of him and opened his 5 fingers. His expression gradually became serious and ferocious. Since the most important thing had been done, then it was time to move forward. The scene finally became completely quiet with the Dwarf King's gesture. 2 armored dwarven warriors walked to the front of the Dwarf King with a long tray in their hands. There was a simple war hammer lying on the tray. There was nothing special about the war hammer. It had a wooden handle and a stone hammerhead. It was as if looking at this war hammer was looking at the word origin. Coincidentally, the war hammer was called Origin, the origin of the dwarves. It was the scepter of the Dwarf King from the first generation, the proof of the Dwarf King. Every word the Dwarf King said in front of this war hammer would be transmitted to the souls of the dwarf ancestors. My compatriots, you must already know that the raging flames of war have burned our homeland. I had already made up my mind to fight to the death with the treacherous humans. But someone told me that as long as we temporarily avoided the sharp edge, the humans would retreat without attacking. This would also save the lives of countless dwarven warriors. However, I rejected his suggestion without any hesitation. Because we are dwarves, we are brave and fearless. We are under the protection of the god of forging and weapons. Dwarves can only fight to the death. We will not live. The enemy has invaded our homeland. If we choose to escape, then even if the dwarf race survives, it will only exist in name. Because our souls are dead, the ancestral spirits in the temple will no longer recognize us. Cowardly dwarves are not real dwarves. If we fight, even if the dwarf race is destroyed here, our heroic story will be passed down for generations on the continent and will be remembered. If we escape, even if the dwarf race is unharmed, we will be laughed at by all races, including ourselves. We will die eventually, so why not use our limited lives in exchange for infinite glory? We should fight to defend the dignity of the dwarf race, even though it will cost us our precious lives. But the price of dignity was high. It had always been so. So, noble dwarven warriors, take up the weapons you are proud of. Then, be angry. Shout it out. Fight. The Dwarf King Bronzebeard loudly declared his declaration in front of the Hammer of Origin. Deafening cheers rang out. The dwarves were ready for war. The dwarf on the left holding the tray said, "Your Majesty, please give the order." Everyone immediately quieted down and listened attentively to the king's words. The Dwarf King glanced at the army in front of him and said with a smile, "Then take out all the good wine that you have collected. It's not good to not reward the warriors before the war. Moreover, if you go to war without drinking all the wine, you will inevitably be worried. Wouldn't it be a great loss if you die in battle?" The face of the dwarf, holding the tray, suddenly became extremely ugly. He thought that his majesty was still so reckless. How could he let the warriors shout before the battle? If the humans found out that the warriors were secretly drinking before the war, they would probably be hacked to death by their own people before the enemy even made a move. Just as he was about to say something, he heard the crowd burst into laughter. It seemed that the Dwarf King's move was very popular. The dwarf holding the tray said that he failed to compete for the throne, and now it seemed that it was not wrong. The Dwarf King laughed and said, "Then, let's start the banquet. Drink up all the wine." For some reason, the dwarven warriors made a huge wolf howl. This sound seemed to be more enthusiastic than when they heard the king's declaration before. The dwarf holding the tray on the right swallowed his saliva and thought that if the dwarves could master the technology of brewing wine, they would probably change to believing in the god of wine. In the hut of Jilin and the others, Staya stood by the window and looked at the dwarves' crazy banquet with a worried frown. Now she saw what a real carnival was. These dwarves seemed to be using all their remaining lives to enjoy this banquet. Everyone had abandoned all restraint and was in chaos. Staya could feel that the most intense indulgence hid the deepest despair They had been friends with the Snow Wind Empire for many years, and the dwarves were responsible for the development of their core technology. The dwarves naturally knew the strength of the Snow Wind Empire like the back of their hand. Everyone knew that even if they had the god-slaying cannon, they would still lose. Even if the god-slaying cannon could destroy a mobile city with one shot, the problem was that there was more than one mobile city. Even if the god-slaying cannon had the energy of the veins as its energy source, the charging process still needed more than 8 hours. It had to be said that the powerful productivity derived from the terrifying number of humans was beyond the reach of other races. Bane sat on a stool, and a black dagger made by the dwarves flew up and down on his fingers. It was as agile as a dancing butterfly. Although Bane played it beautifully, a weapon was still a weapon, and the cold light that flashed from time to time could still make people tremble with fear. Bane was very bored. He could not do anything here, and if he accidentally left Staya for too long, he would be in danger of being roasted to death by the lava. Of course, Bane was not in the mood to go out for a stroll. He was now waiting for Jilin and Aisha to come out, and then he could leave this heartbreaking country without stopping for a moment. But when he saw Staya's worried expression, he felt that things might not develop as he expected. Staya was very conflicted. She knew that there would be a battle soon. The human army was pressing on the border, and their target was naturally Jilin. After all, the Pope had already come, and a small dwarf was not worth such a big fuss. But the humans came for Jilin, and the dwarves thought that the humans' target was them. Therefore, they felt that the humans were bullying the dwarves too much, and swore to bet the glory of the dwarves to fight to the death with the humans. Jilin and Bane only wanted to get Jilin's weapon as soon as possible and leave. He did not know what Aisha was thinking. If he did nothing, the biggest possibility was that Jilin would take his companions and weapons, and at most say goodbye to the dwarves and leave. Then the humans and the dwarves would have a meaningless war, and the people would be in a terrible situation. By then, even if he told the Pope that Jilin had left, it would be useless. Judging from the behavior of the humans, at this point, a war was inevitable. The only question was who to fight. No matter who the enemy was, whether it was a megalosaurus or a dwarf, whether it was necessary or not, they must fight. The army came here with so many people, and returning without success was a big taboo for military strategists. Staya was born in a royal family, and this was very clear. Because this was also politics, politics was the most important and also the most anti-human invention of the human race. Since ancient times, there were as many humans who sacrificed themselves for politics as carps crossing the river. If Jilin really left, then the human warriors who died fighting the dwarves would all be victims of politics. But if she wanted to stop the war between the dwarves and the humans, there was only one way, and that was to let Jilin stand in front of the dwarves and fight the humans. But the result would not change at all, and the people would only be in a terrible situation. In Staya's mind, there were two best scenarios. One was that the humans had some extremely powerful trump card that could kill Jilin as soon as he appeared. The humans would win a complete victory, and there would be no need to fight the dwarves, and everyone would be happy. Only Aisha, Bane, and herself, or some dwarves who were grateful for Jilin's kindness would feel sad. The second was that Jilin would control himself like he did in the Shengming city to reduce human casualties. Let the humans realize their own powerlessness and then retreat. Both of these ideas were beautiful, but they were just wishful thinking. If the humans had such a powerful trump card, they would not take Jilin's threat so seriously. Let Jilin just take a beating and not fight back. Staya thought that it was because the rules of the dragon race stated that the dragons could only be vegetarian and could not kill. It was ridiculous to think about it. There was no other way. It was a dead end. Staya sighed and made a conclusion. But since it was useless to think about it, it was better not to think about it. Bane, let's go, Staya said with a determined look. Where to? To find the Pope. Since there was no other way, they could only try something that was not a way. Staya decided to try to persuade the Pope to let the humans retreat. Even though she knew it was not very likely, Staya would not give up. Sometimes it was human to do something even though they knew it was impossible. It was not that they could not judge the current situation, but they were not willing to give up that little bit of hope. Besides, Staya was a knight. Humility, honor, sacrifice, bravery, mercy, honesty, justice, and soul were the well-known 8 virtues of a knight. Staya felt that if she did not do something now, there was no need to talk about mercy and honor. Staya looked at the drunken dwarf and softly lowered her head to recite the knight's oath. I swear to be kind to the weak. I swear to fight against violence. I swear to fight against all wrongs. I swear to fight for the defenseless. I swear to help anyone who asks me for help. I swear to not hurt any woman. I swear to help my brothers and knights. I swear to be sincere to my friends. I swear I'll love you till death do me part. Bane only felt that Staya was so dazzling at this moment. She was full of the light of humanity. She was unattainable. Was this the kind of human that God was looking forward to? The path of a knight was indeed worthy of oneself and worthy of God. Bane, who was illuminated by Staya's knight's light, gradually became determined and nodded. Then let's go. Chapter 53. Although Staya, who had the spirit of a knight, had a beautiful wish to save all living beings, but the god of light would not take care of her because of this. He would not send her directly to the Pope. Staya was not like Aisha, who had a very convenient teleportation circle, or like Jilin, who could travel to the North Sea in the morning and Kangwoo in the evening. Although the human knight profession was very noble, they could not fly. There were only 3 days left before the war began. The humans should have already prepared everything and gone to the battlefield. On the other hand, the dwarves seemed to want to fight with the humans with the help of alcohol. That was quite heroic, so Staya had to get to the Snowfire Plain within 3 days. She had to find the Pope and persuade him before the dwarven army appeared in the human sight. And she had to bring along Bane, an iron-level thief. Otherwise, if Jilin came out 1 or 2 days later, Bane would be roasted dry by the steaming magma in this underground volcano cave. So Staya was very anxious. Time was very tight. When you really want to do something, the whole world will make way for you. If Jilin were to say it, these words would truly vividly display the arrogance and self-deceit of humans. The truth was that no matter how great a human was, the world would not take you seriously. It would not hinder you, but it would not make way for you. Staya thought so now. When she wanted to find a horse or something to ride, she found that the dwarves did not have the habit of using mounts. When a knight wanted to go to the battlefield with a strong will, he found that he did not have a horse. This was the most helpless thing. The forging room was dead silent because Jilin and Aisha did not speak. Jilin was establishing a connection with his weapon. This new feeling made him very happy. Aisha, on the other hand, was fully focused on controlling the formation. Suddenly, Aisha opened her eyes. Staya left. Aisha said, "Where did she go?" Jilin asked. Looking at the direction, "She should be in the human camp." "How do you know where the human camp is?" Aisha sighed helplessly. Jilin's focus on things was always so inexplicable. Aisha did not want to tell Jilin that she went to see the Pope a few days ago and naturally knew the location of the human camp. She simply said, "It's none of your business." Jilin didn't care and continued. Then what did she do? Aisha really felt a headache coming on. If it were someone else, she would have looked at them with a look of caring for an idiot. You were the one who barged into Staya's house and kidnapped her. Now that the hostage's family was here, the hostage had to work a little harder to escape from the bad guy's lair. Was it hard to understand that the hostage had to find her own family? She even asked me where she was going. It wasn't strange for him to do anything. Aisha didn't know why, but she really wanted to ridicule Jilin. If he was a human, she would have done so long ago. But the other party was a dragon, and the wisdom of a witch told her not to do so. Moreover, if Staya was a normal person, then Aisha's previous thoughts were completely reasonable. But Staya was not. Even Aisha didn't believe that Staya would go to the human camp for this reason. Because Staya was a saintess, a knight, she demanded herself according to the rules of a knight. She wanted to be able to not be happy with external gains and not be sad for herself. She took it as her responsibility to save the world. This kind of person was very troublesome. If her cause of saving the world failed, she would be a bookworm, a wooden fish head, and a dogmatic Taoist teacher that the Central Empire always talked about. But if she succeeded, people would call her a saint. It was very similar to the human's habit of changing the rudder according to the wind. Then the most likely reason for this kind of person to go to the human camp at this time was that she wanted to do something for this war that was in line with the will of the God of Light. For example, to stop it. Aisha thought, maybe she wants to stop this war. Aisha said, why stop the war? Jilin asked, to save the lives of those innocent people in Staya's heart. Aisha was speechless. There are innocent people on the battlefield? Jilin wondered. Aisha was stunned by Qilin's question, which was rare for him to not be a moron. She pondered seriously for a long time before she said with uncertainty, after all, there are so many people. Some of them are innocent. Jilin also thought for a while and said, that makes sense. Jilin stopped asking, but Aisha still had a lot on her mind. She knew that Staya's position in Jilin's heart should be higher than her, because Staya was too important to Jilin. There was now a small golden mountain made of treasures in the Red Dragon Palace. Batel would show Jilin the mountain through the magic mirror every time he reported the recent situation to Jilin. Every time Jilin saw that the mountain was bigger, he would be very happy. And now Jilin had a vision in his heart, which was to sleep on the mountain in the form of a dragon. This would require the mountain to be at least 2 or 3 times bigger. This mountain came because of Staya. Many adventurers risked their lives and entered the Red Dragon Palace, which was a place of certain death. They swore to save the princess and become heroes. But sadly, they did not know that the princess was enjoying the snow with the ultimate villain in the northernmost part of the continent, and they were risking their lives in the westernmost part of the continent. Even if the adventurers really broke through the Red Dragon Palace, they would not become heroes and could not complete the mission. But fortunately, so far, no one had broken through the Red Dragon Palace. All the adventurers who attacked the Red Dragon Palace had their bodies become the surface of the magma under the Red Dragon Palace, and their treasures became part of the growing mountain of treasures. To the greedy dragons, the importance of Sti, who had such an outstanding role in gathering wealth, was self-evident. But for Jilin, Staya's most important use was as an opportunity to visit heroes. Jilin always believed that as long as he was with Staya, he would always meet heroes. Heroes who were strong enough to slay dragons naturally attracted the attention of the invincible dragons. Therefore, Jilin would never give up on Staya. Although Jilin was still sitting in front of the sword-casting table and did not seem to care about Staya, this was because Jilin believed that he could find Staya at any time. That's right, Jilin would find Staya. This was a reason why Aisha kept thinking and feeling uneasy. If Jilin went to find Staya, where would he find her? Of course, where would Staya go? Where would Staya go? Staya went to the human camp. The saintess of the Church of Light went through a lot and came back after a narrow escape. How could the Pope not know? How could he not meet her? When Jilin went to ask for her, the Pope would naturally stand in front of Staya and say, how could the saintess of the Church of Light be taken away by you? Then everything would be clear. Although the Pope was known as the strongest human saint, Aisha did not think that he would have any power to fight back against Jilin, even if Jilin had promised her that he would not hurt the Pope. But obviously, the realist Aisha did not believe in something as illusory as oaths. Aisha thought that Jilin would at most stab the Pope to death and then turn around and pretend to be enlightened and say, I forgot, I'm so sorry. Aisha always suspected that when Jilin stabbed Bane to death, he was really counting the 2 minutes that Bane said, or he was already impatient. It seemed that she would have to make the first move and drag the Pope away from Jilin. As for the other members of the Church of Light, they could choose to die. They would die sooner or later anyway. Aisha made up her mind and naturally calmed down. She did not think too much. She had to help Jilin complete the weapon as soon as possible so that things would not go wrong. On the clean white snowfield, a snow line suddenly appeared and extended to the distance at an extremely fast speed. A huge level, 5 magical beasts. The snow-ground white lizard was running quickly. Its body was huge, and its limbs were extremely short, but it moved very fast. Instead of saying that it was running on the snowfield, it was better to say that it was marching on the snowfield. Its path was extremely straight, like a sword that split the snowfield. But this was not its intention. It was born with a long tail that dragged on the ground, so it did not like to walk in a straight line. Instead, it twisted and turned. However, the human sitting on its body pressed down on its neck so that it could not change its direction and could only keep moving forward. If a diamond-level warrior really wanted a mount, they would be able to find one, especially in this kind of barren land where there were few people and wild beasts. Staya forced the snow-ground white lizard to run forward, while she looked into the distance without blinking. After a night of running, the top of the moving city finally appeared on the horizon with the first ray of light. Although the guards of the moving city had already noticed that someone was running towards them arrogantly, they were not too nervous, even if they were on the battlefield. It was only one person. The city behind her and the many powerful warriors in the city gave the guards a lot of confidence. They did not think that the person was here to attack them, because no one would be so crazy as to seek their own death. Therefore, they watched as Staya crossed the warning line. Staya had just arrived at the city gate, and before she could even catch her breath, she shouted, "I am the princess of the Simai Empire, the saintess of the Church of Light. Bring me to see the Pope." As for Bane, he was already dizzy and could not even remember who he was. The guards at the gate were shocked by Staya's name. At the same time, they were very glad that they had made a wise decision. Only the general guarding the gate walked to the gate and said in a deep voice, "How do you prove your identity?" Staya took out the sacred book of light. The general shouted, "Open the gate and welcome the Saintess." Chapter 54. The Saintess that was once taken away by the Megalosaurus was now riding a magic beast back alone. Of course, this immediately attracted everyone's attention. The soldiers of the mobile city welcomed the Saintess back home with great enthusiasm. Of course, it was also possible that they simply wanted to see what the Saintess and Princess looked like. Staya was very anxious to see the Pope. Normally, there shouldn't be anything that could attract her attention at this time. But Staya kept looking at the streets of the mobile city. Walking in this great city, Staya couldn't even feel the difference between it and other normal cities. There were all kinds of facilities, even a market. But such a normal-looking city was actually traversed through mountains and valleys to get here. It made a giant city appear out of thin air in the snow-fire plains that was usually uninhabited overnight. Staya, who had seen the fortress before, imagined the scene of the city standing up and then towering into the clouds. Staya couldn't help but shiver. At that moment, her heart seemed to have become colder than this world of ice and snow. A miraculous project like the mobile city was undoubtedly impossible to complete in just a few years. This meant that the Snow Wind Empire had been preparing for many years, and Jilin had only appeared in the human world for a few years. So who was this thing prepared for? Who did the Snow Wind Empire want to use this city against? Naturally, it was the other human empires, including the Simai Empire. At that moment, Staya's mood became a lot more complicated. Due to Staya's special identity, she quickly met the Iron Blood King with Bane. Bane was also very excited, but not because of the great mobile city, but because he had never seen the Emperor of the Empire before, so he was naturally nervous. When the Iron Blood King heard that Staya was here, he immediately put down everything he was doing and quickly went to meet Staya. It wasn't just because Staya was the princess of the Simai Empire. It was also because the Iron Blood King thought that Staya was the human who had been in contact with the Red Disaster the longest. So she must have a lot of information about Jilin. Now that a great battle was imminent, this information could be very important. Although the saying, "Know thyself and know thy enemy, and you will be victorious in every battle," was a bit exaggerated, there was nothing wrong with it. Staya walked into the biggest palace in the mobile city under the guidance of the crowd. The Iron Blood King was already sitting on the high throne, waiting for her. Staya quickly walked in front of the Iron Blood King and bowed slightly to show her respect. Staya was very close to the Iron Blood King. He was so close that Staya could see the slightest change in the Iron Blood King's expression. The Iron Blood King's facial expression was complicated, which was rare. Excitement, anticipation, concern, doubt. Most of them were kind. Staya could feel it. But what was even more obvious was that everyone could see that the Iron Blood King was trying his best to organize his words. He had a lot of things he wanted to say, but he wanted to make them as short and clear as possible. He needed to think about it. Staya, of course, would not wait for the Iron Blood King to organize his speech. She immediately said, "Iron Blood King, Your Majesty, I want to see the Pope." The Iron Blood King was interrupted by Staya, but he was not unhappy at all. Instead, he was obviously relieved that he did not have to start the conversation. With someone starting the conversation, it would be easier to talk. So the Iron Blood King replied, "He's not here." Staya's beautiful eyes slowly widened. She was a bit shocked. She never thought that a person like the Pope would leave their base at such a critical moment. "Then, I would like to see the Son of God," Staya said. "He's not here," the Iron Blood King said. Staya was completely confused. She did not know what to do. It was fine if the Pope was not here, but this person was rarely seen. To put it nicely, he was elusive. She had only seen the Pope a few times since she was young, so it was normal for him not to be here. Uncle Lord, on the other hand, is a very steady person. Whether the Pope was here or not, he had always taken care of the Church of Light. In the eyes of outsiders, he was already the Pope. It was impossible for him not to be here. Did something happen? Staya looked at Bei Luo, who was standing on the side. She hoped that he could give her a detailed explanation. She could not rely on the Iron Blood King for this. The Iron Blood King did not like to talk. Who in the royal family of the Empire did not know? If she wanted him to give a detailed explanation, it would probably be her father, the Sacred King, who came. She seemed to be lacking a bit of weight. Bei Luo asked the Iron Blood King with his eyes. After the Iron Blood King nodded slightly, Bei Luo said, "Your Highness, the Pope and the Son of God have already left with the Church of Light a day ago." "Left? Why?" Staya asked. "The Pope said that in the war between the Snow Wind Empire and the Dwarf Kingdom, the Church of Light will not help us, but will save the soldiers from both sides. The Snow Wind Empire cannot let people who are not on the same side as us appear in our camp during the war," Bei Luo said. Staya was stunned. She suddenly felt that the Pope was not as useless as she thought. This action completely carried out the teachings of the Church of Light. Light, pity the world, grace the world. But it was not pleasing. Now was not the time to think about this. "Then where did they go?" Staya asked. "In the snow fire plains, at the border between snow and fire," Bei Luo said. "Where is that?" "The front line of the battle between the dwarves and the Snow Wind Empire." Staya sighed and looked at the Iron Blood King. She thought that since she could not find the Pope, it would be the same if she could convince the Iron Blood King. "May I ask your Highness the Iron Blood King, why did you mobilize so many people this time? Is the target Jilin?" Staya asked. "Jilin," the Iron Blood King thought for a while and said, "The name of the Red Disaster." "Yes," Staya said. "Yes," the Iron Blood King said. "Since the target is Jilin, then why did you declare war with the dwarves? How innocent are the dwarves?" In these years, the dwarves and the Snow Wind Empire were very close. They were a rare and friendly neighbor. The entire continent knew about this. But now, the Iron Blood King wanted to attack the dwarves because of a creature that had nothing to do with him. It was very chilling. This kind of betrayal, bullying the weak, and harming the innocent would hurt the Iron Blood King's benevolence. "I hope your Highness the Iron Blood King will reconsider," Staya said in a low voice. "Ha ha ha, what a joke. My king's name is Iron Blood. Where did the benevolence come from? Your Highness, don't use the Saimai Empire's methods on my Snow Wind Empire," Duke Lawrence couldn't help but say. The Duke still wanted to say something, but seeing the Iron Blood King raise his hand, he snorted angrily and didn't say anything else. "It's related to the survival of the human race. No, it's for the sake of it. No, it's for the sake of it," the Iron Blood King said laboriously. "If that's the case, may I ask your Highness the Iron Blood King, if Jilin has already left the Dwarf Empire, will the Snow Wind Empire still fight with the dwarves?" Staya said, "Yes." "Why is that?" Staya said anxiously. "You know, The Iron Blood King looked straight into Stya's eyes and said slowly. Stya was speechless because she did know. These words were said with a sliver of hope. It would be a blessing if they succeeded, and it would be natural if they failed. Therefore, the Iron Blood King's words were within Stya's expectations. Forgive me for being direct, but Jilin's strength is probably far beyond your expectations. I know that the Snow Wind Empire is no longer what it used to be, but it seems like there's still a huge difference if you want to defeat Jilin, Stya said. Your Highness, forgive me for not understanding, but why do you keep speaking for the Red Calamity? You were kidnapped by the Red Calamity, and the Red Calamity destroyed the capital of the Saimai Empire, Sacred City. Logically speaking, you should be the one who hates the Red Calamity the most. Duke Lawrence frowned and said suspiciously. What do you mean by that? Stya said angrily. Your Highness, please calm down. Duke Lawrence did not mean to suspect the princess. He was just a bit confused. Please forgive him, Bello said hastily. Stya tried hard to suppress her anger and said, I just don't want to see the warriors of my human race sacrificed for nothing. So I came to remind you that Jilin is undefeatable. Iron Blood King, please think carefully about your choice. The Iron Blood King shook his head slightly and said, I didn't want to win. Stya really didn't understand now. Didn't want to win? Then why did he start a war? The Iron Blood King nodded to Bello. He signaled for Bello to explain to Stya. Bello then said, Your Highness, you don't know, but all of the human empires have already united and vowed to fight against the Red Calamity. We are only the vanguard, and our goal is only to test the enemy's strength. The future will be the time when humans truly fight against the Red Calamity. The failure now is only for the victory in the future. The warrior's blood won't be shed for nothing. They will all be heroes of the human race. This is only your wishful thinking. The heroes you speak of might not think this way. They are only under the military order and have no choice but to launch a desperate attack against an undefeatable enemy. Stya said, This is the sacrifice of the human race. For the final victory, this sacrifice is necessary. Please maintain your respect, Your Highness, the Duke said. Moths flying into flames is also very heroic, but no one will say that it is a heroic sacrifice. They will only say that it is self-destruction, Stya said. Little flying insects only act based on their instincts. They don't know life and death. How can they be compared to humans? Bello said, In Jilin's eyes, they are all the same. Chapter 55. You? The Duke stepped forward. Enough, the Iron Blood King said. Is there really no way to change it? Stya looked at the Iron Blood King. The Iron Blood King shook his head slowly. Stya's eyes dimmed. She knew she had failed. This was the first time the Iron Blood King expressed his decision clearly. Stya was a princess. Of course, she knew that a king would not make any decision easily, because any decision they made would affect the fate of many people. A slight change would affect the entire situation. But once they made a decision, they could not change it. All kings had a perverted obsession with the saying, kings do not lie, because it would allow them to feel the sense of security of holding the supreme power in their hands. It was ridiculous. The people with the most power were the ones with the least sense of security. They thought that everyone would covet their power. They did not trust anyone. That was why they were lonely. That was why they called themselves loners. The war was unavoidable. Life was not as smooth as it seemed. People needed to be fated to achieve anything. The right time, the right place, and the right people were all important. So, most of the time, there was nothing they could do. The moon replaced the sun again and occupied the sky. Without the suppression of the sun, the stars shone brightly. But tonight, it was not as quiet as usual. It was as if thunder had exploded on the ground. The continuous roar spread across the snowy plains. The city was moving. Stya stood by the window and looked down at the ground that kept moving behind her. She could not help but feel like the world was under her control. If Stya was like this, then the Iron Blood King who created all of this was even more so. Stya thought, no wonder the Iron Blood King was so arrogant. He wanted to use the power of humans to fight against the Megalosaurus. People always wanted to challenge things that were beyond their abilities, even if they were covered in wounds. because they thought they could do it. They believed that as long as they believed they could do it, they could do it. But humans had their limits. This world was just so real and cold. Objective things will not change because of the shift of one's consciousness, even if one's will is lofty and firm as a rock, even if one dies 9 times but still has no regrets. However, some people just didn't believe it. They said that man could conquer the heavens. They felt that they could move the heavens and move the earth. Even if he didn't drown to death in the end, he definitely wouldn't feel good. If he didn't really fall, he wouldn't be able to see his own ability clearly. You won't look at reality seriously until you've been beaten black and blue by it. You won't shed tears until you see the coffin. You won't turn back until you hit the southern wall. This was not something that could be done by human power. However, humans were not frogs at the bottom of a well. They were a great race. They have a tradition of creating miracles. Humans believed that anything was possible. This sentence was particularly convincing in a mobile city. After all, if a city could run, what else was impossible? From Stya's point of view, the city and the people on it were sprinting toward the south wall at a frightening speed. Moreover, the people in power had already prepared for the worst, and there was no way to change it. If this went on, there were only 2 possibilities. One was to hit the wall and make a shocking roar, and then the mobile city and the human race would be smashed into pieces. Or they would smash a hole in the south wall. At that time, the dragon race, which was comparable to the gods, would just be animals in the eyes of humans. There were many creatures in this world that were stronger than humans. Lions, tigers, crocodiles, elephants, and even various magic beasts. Weren't they all trampled under the feet of humans in the end? How could the dragon race be an exception? This was the world of humans. Even if it was a god, if they wanted to survive in this world, they had to ask for the permission of humans first. Humans could say that with a swagger, although the possibility was very small. But it was this small possibility that could make humans even more crazy. The dwarves had arrived at the battlefield earlier than the humans because they needed to build a position and had more preparation work to do. The humans obviously didn't need it now. A mobile city sat here, and everything was ready. A city appeared on the battlefield out of thin air, turning a positional battle into a defensive battle. Was there any better preparation than this? All the inventions of humans seemed to be for slacking off and pleasing themselves. Dan, who was working hard to build a position, couldn't help but complain in his heart. He looked up and glanced around. He was surrounded by dwarves who were bending over to work. He couldn't help but smile, thinking that the king's decision was really wise. Drinking all the wine in the dwarves' collection. It must be known that the wine cellar of the dwarves had never been empty. When it was difficult, everyone could not drink, but the wine cellar could not be empty. The wine was placed in piles there. As long as everyone looked at it, they would feel a lot happier. Even if they couldn't drink it, they could comfort themselves by saying that it would be better to drink it in the future. This time, the wine cellar was empty. After many dwarves sobered up, they looked at the empty wine cellar and were speechless on the spot, with a look of hopelessness on their faces. It seemed that they wanted to find a way to die on the spot. It just so happened that the war was imminent. It was really good that someone gave them a pillow when they were about to doze off, and they were about to go to war when they wanted to die. The dwarves were all eager to fight, and the atmosphere was high. If they didn't love life, why would they be afraid of death? In the 10 minutes that Dan was lost in his thoughts, a medium-sized annihilation cannon that could be operated by one person had been assembled. The parts were already cast, and now it was just assembling, so there was no need to concentrate or be distracted. This kind of work could be done by any dwarf with their eyes closed while chatting with others. The medium-sized annihilation cannon was the backbone weapon of the dwarves this time. Its attack speed was fast, and its power was not exaggerated. It was equivalent to a 6th-order gold rank magician who did not need to cool down. It also had a self-destruct function. From the outside, it looked like a huge cannon, but the difference was that there was a control room at the end of the cannon, which could only accommodate one dwarf sitting inside to adjust the direction and fire. Such weapons were densely packed in this position, and there were countless of them. But the real highlight was still that one. Dan turned his head to look at the god-killing cannon that stood behind the dwarves' position like a mountain peak. It was a weapon that was enough to kill gods. Its huge muzzle, which was glowing with cold light, was already aimed in the direction of the Snow Wind Empire. Even the dwarves of the same camp could feel its danger. Dan believed that no matter what blocked the god-killing cannon, there would only be one end, which was to turn into ashes. "Your Majesty, the preparations are ready. Everything is ready." The dwarf guard reported to the dwarf king. "Did I really do the right thing?" The dwarf king muttered to himself, although he had already made up his mind. After all, it was the lives of so many of his compatriots, and they had not drunk enough wine. After all, it was related to the survival of the dwarves. At the last moment, even the dwarf king could not help but doubt the decision he had made. Was it worth it? For dignity, was it really worth it to lose their lives? For the sake of spreading the story of the dwarves in the world, was it really worth it to let the dwarves disappear? The guard lowered his head slightly and said, "Your Majesty, don't think too much. Your wavering at this time is a major blow to our army's morale. This kind of thing is not up to us. Since that is the case, we might as well act according to our hearts. Anyway, only God knows whether it is right or wrong, whether it is a merit or a demerit. Leave it to future generations to judge. We don't need to worry about nothing." The dwarf king sighed and glanced at the moving city that was rushing over from afar. "You are right. The situation is pressing. The arrow is on the bow, and it has to be shot. It is useless to think too much." The dwarf king raised his fist and shouted, "Formation! Pass the king's order, formation! Pass the king's order, pass!" This voice echoed throughout the battlefield. All the annihilation cannons lit up with a green indicator light at the back, which meant that they could fire at any time. A violent rumbling sound came, suppressing all the other sounds. It was deafening. The moving city began to slow down and stopped in front of the dwarf formation. Due to the arrival of the two moving cities, a violent wind was set off on the plains out of thin air. It blew a lot of snow from the Snow Wind Empire to the Dwarf Kingdom. It blew so hard that the dwarves could not open their eyes. The reason why they did not directly rush into the dwarves' camp was because it was a human tradition to say a few words before starting a war. The moving city was completely still, followed by a series of mechanical sounds. All the weapons on the moving city had been activated. It was also a human tradition to show off their strength before speaking. The battlefield of the Snow Wind Empire was in the north, a world of ice and snow. The battlefield of the Dwarf Kingdom was in the south, an endless red volcanic landscape. Between the two armies was the junction of the snow-fire plains, a gray area with neither snow nor fire. But the sun slowly rose above it, dyeing it with a faint layer of gold. Both sides opened their weapons and confronted each other. Swords were drawn. Chapter 56. As people said, there would always be a moment of peace before the storm. When a mobile city was ready, the battlefield finally quieted down. Everyone held their breaths. Their nerves were extremely tense, and their foreheads were covered with sweat. Their hands were on the buttons and triggers, and they held their weapons tightly. But they controlled themselves with strong willpower not to attack. The two sides were facing each other, but it was silent. Everyone was waiting. The stage was ready. So it was time for the main character to appear. The Dwarf King stood on the platform of the god-killing cannon and stared in the direction of the mobile city. Sure enough, the Iron Blood King, surrounded by his subordinates, slowly walked to the square above the mobile city. The Iron Blood King saw the Dwarf King immediately, and their eyes met. The Iron Blood King cleared his throat and said loudly with his diamond-level strength, "Brother, how have you been? Years ago, we parted. Today, we finally meet again. I didn't expect F*CKU. We've already met on the battlefield. How can I wait for you to speak one word at a time like before? It's useless to say anything. Warriors of the dwarf race, attack." The Dwarf King shouted, "Attack!" The dwarf race's camp shouted. The dwarf race's camp rose, and immediately, a colorful barrage of energy bombs flew high into the sky and fell toward the mobile city. This was the beginning of the war. It was just a human tradition to say a few words before the war. The Iron Blood King looked up at the colorful energy bombs falling toward him like raindrops. There was no fear or panic in his eyes. There was only admiration for the Dwarf King. People who didn't talk much would always admire people who did things quickly and efficiently, because he could always make himself talk less. Although the Iron Blood King admired the Dwarf King very much, the Dwarf King didn't appreciate him at all. The Dwarf King pointed at the mobile city where the Iron Blood King was and said to his subordinates, "Stupid humans, you expose your position as the commander just because of this. Aim the god-killing cannon at the mobile city. As long as we destroy it, the humans will be anxious to confirm whether the Iron Blood King is alive or dead. They will be in chaos, and then our chance will come. If we can kill the Iron Blood King directly, we'll win." "Yes," the guard replied, but then he asked doubtfully, "But your majesty, you've also exposed your position." "Idiot, aren't I just about to move?" The Dwarf King said, "Your majesty is wise." When the beautiful energy bomb flew through the sky, it looked exactly like a meteor. The energy bullets that filled the sky were like a meteor shower. Dragging its long tail, it drew out a gorgeous trajectory. However, that was the trajectory of death. Staya thought. Just as these meteors were about to hit the sky above the moving city, it was as if they had hit a transparent wall. They exploded one after another. The meteor turned into a splendid firework. Although the shield that protected the entire mobile city was raging, it did not shatter. The Dwarf King looked at the scene and sighed. "I didn't expect the Snow Wind Empire to join hands with the Church of Light." The guard asked, "Your Majesty, what should we do?" "Continue to fight. The Pope has already said that he will no longer intervene in the war between us and the Snow Wind Empire. Moreover, as far as we know, the Snow Wind Empire does not have the ability to arrange such a huge array. Knock it off first." "Yes." Then the continuous attacks came one after another. The soldiers and the cannons pressed the firing button tightly. It seemed that even if he died at this moment, his hand would not let go. The Duke looked at the dwarf's decisive attack and said, "Your Majesty, the Dwarf King does not seem to be scared by us." "Of course," the Iron Blood King said. "Then we should fight back. Your Majesty, please give the order to attack. As long as the mobile city rushes into the enemy's formation, we will win this battle." The Duke said, "No rush. First, we should test the waters." The Iron Blood King waved his hand. The Duke heard this, and his expression was slightly sad. According to his idea, it was a sure thing, but the Iron Blood King wanted to sacrifice the lives of many soldiers for nothing. The Duke knew that perhaps for the Emperor, using the soldiers' lives to test the waters was the most cost-effective and safest action. But to the Duke, every soldier on the battlefield was his comrade in arms, his soldiers. They should not be sacrificed so easily. But he did not say anything and carried out the Iron Blood King's order, because he knew that on the battlefield, no matter how bad the idea of the commander was, it was better than having two voices. On the battlefield, there were thousands of changes in an instant. How could there be time for discussion, hesitation, and disobedience? The firepower of the mobile city was fully unleashed, and the dwarves' energy bombs reflected each other. Although it was not absolute suppression, it had effectively dispersed the dwarves' firepower. A heavy cavalry unit of the Snow Wind Empire took advantage of this opportunity to rush out of the mobile city under the rain of bullets, vowing to rush into the enemy's formation. But it was not a wise move to deal with the dwarves with cavalry. The dwarves themselves were shorter than humans, and it would be more difficult for the cavalry to attack while sitting on horseback. On the other hand, the dwarves only needed to hold their spears against the ground, and they could easily stab the cavalry and their horses to death in midair. However, if it was just a test, then the cavalry was the best choice. Because of the high mobility of the cavalry, their survival rate was higher than that of other units. If other units were 1%, then the cavalry should be able to reach 5%. Hurry up, get rid of the muzzle above. His grandmother, the firepower is too fierce. What the hell is this? A dwarf captain said. Well said. Let the humans see the super long-range artillery of our dwarves. One of the cannons, with a particularly long barrel, shot out a red ray after accumulating power. That was the trace left by the friction and burning air as the shell flew past at high speed. The shell passed through the protective shield in an instant and caused a violent explosion on the outer wall of the mobile city, causing the humans to exclaim. The dwarf who fired the shell looked seriously through the scope for a long time, and then cursed his mother a mist. "You waste, you only know how to drink and can't do anything else. Such a precious shell only made a sound. Hurry up and fire again. If you miss again this time, I will kick you to death," the dwarf captain said. The dwarf who fired the shell was preparing to fire again and scolded back. "You hurry up and get out of here. It's so far away. If you miss a little here, the other side will miss a lot. If you can do it, then why don't you do it? You talk as if you can shoot very accurately. What are you pretending to be an elf for?" the dwarf said while preparing to fire again. When he was ready, he suddenly realized that the captain had not talked back for such a long time. This was so abnormal that the dwarf couldn't help but stand up from the control room and poke his head out. After just a glance, he sat back down. The captain had fallen to the ground and was lying in a pool of blood. Looking at the situation, it was most likely his own blood. The captain should not have been killed by a human stray bullet. If it was a human shell, the corpse would not be so intact. It was more like a human shell fell to the ground, and the small stones that exploded went through the captain's body. The captain's death could be said to be without warning and silent. Extremely unlucky. Lunu had now been automatically promoted from a gunner to a captain. He couldn't help but think that it was no wonder that people said that the battlefield was the fastest place for soldiers to be promoted. Not just because of the military merits you have gained. It may also be because your boss is dead. But Lunu was not happy at all because he and the captain were very good friends in private, and the two had given each other their own proud works. Lunu thought that this was good. All the wine in your house was mine. But you're already gone. If I die too, who's going to drink my wine? You unlucky guy. You dare to be one step ahead of me? But Lunu did not show these emotions. He just sat in the control room, looking serious, staring at the sight, and said fiercely, "I'll go to your grandmother. Look, someone is coming out." A dwarf scout shouted. "It's cavalry. It's cavalry. They're really coming to die. Brothers, hit them hard. Don't let any of them go back. The humans look down on us too much. Today, we'll teach them a lesson." In the case of a strong city to defend, the humans actually sent out a group of soldiers, and it was the cavalry that was most restrained by the dwarves. This was undoubtedly a provocation by the humans. All the dwarves believed so in their hearts. Suddenly, all the firepower was tilted to the cavalry as much as possible. The pressure on the leading knight suddenly increased. Because he needed to lead the team to determine the direction, charge left and right, and avoid the enemy's attacks. But the enemy's attacks suddenly became so dense. This made him feel a little powerless. Who could go out to play in the rain and not get wet by a drop of rain? Even if you were holding an umbrella and wearing a raincoat and rain shoes. Who could really pass through thousands of flowers and not get a single leaf on their body? No one. So, knights began to fall from their horses constantly, and then were trampled in a meat paste by their companions behind them. The solid, heavy armor on their bodies was enough to withstand energy bombs, but it could not withstand hundreds and thousands of trampling by warhorses. Falling from a warhorse and being trampled to death by their companions was the most painful and cruel way to die as a knight. The charging cavalry would not stop just because their teammates were lying in front of the horses' hooves. It was too late, and it could not be. William listened to the screams of his teammates behind him, and he was very distressed and anxious. He wanted to grind his steel teeth, and his expression was extremely ferocious, but he was powerless. Every scream behind him seemed to cut his heart with a knife. In the end, William even hoped that the next one to die would be himself. He knew very well that this mission was a narrow escape. The Duke had personally issued the mission to test the enemy's strength, but he did not say to what extent the test would be. The cavalry behind him was definitely not weak, but in a war of this scale, it was just a small stone that could not stir up any waves. Test the enemy's strength? For the little power he had at hand, it was bottomless. There was no return. William could have refused this mission, but based on the knight's spirit of sacrifice and the aristocratic family style, he did not do so. He believed that these valiant knights could only play a greater role under his command. In other words, their deaths were more valuable. Now he looked up at the rain of bullets in the sky and listened to the screams of his teammates behind him. His eyes narrowed into slits, and he shouted, F***CKU. Chapter 57. The people who had the deepest experience of war were undoubtedly William and the other soldiers who were fighting on the front lines. Because they were the people closest to death, they were angry because of the death of their closest friends. Because the superiors despised the lives of their comrades, they hated war and thus changed their original intention. Although Lunu and William were in different camps, they were both cursing war. These scenes were playing out all the time on the battlefield. But the superiors would never hear this voice. Or rather, they would not care if they heard it. The war was in full swing, and it was hard to stop. The cavalry led by William finally disappeared under the concentrated fire of the dwarves, like a boat overturned by a huge wave. Haha, well done. Let's see if the humans dare to come out of the big turtle shell this time. Continue to fight, don't stop. Fight! Your Majesty, the cavalry sent out has been completely annihilated, Duke Lawrence said with pain and regret. The Duke had already seen many dead people on the battlefield. It was reasonable to say that even if he could not be indifferent to life and death, he should always be able to calmly wait. But this time, the Duke had such a big reaction because of those knights, which was really abnormal. Because in his view, these people's deaths were completely meaningless. He did not understand why the Iron Blood King would make such a decision. The Iron Blood King looked up at the sky for a while and sighed. The times have changed. The Duke lowered his head and frowned, thinking hard about the Iron Blood King's meaning. These words must have a deep meaning. But after 2 seconds, he gave up. The Duke was definitely a person who could judge the situation clearly and knew how to give up. It was neither the time nor the place to figure out the superior's intentions. Moreover, this was not something he should do. Your Majesty, please order the whole army to attack. A lion will use all its strength to catch a rabbit. We must not be careless, not to mention the strength of the dwarves. The Duke said, I already understand. Go. The Iron Blood King said, Yes, Your Majesty. The Duke bowed his head and cupped his fist. His action was simple and powerful. The arm and hand armor collided, making a unique sound of armor. The Duke understood this time. This was the meaning of allowing the whole army to attack. At this moment, the Duke officially had full command of the army and became the commander of the Snow Wind Empire's army. The Duke turned around and flung his cloak behind him. He then walked towards the Iron Blood King with a majestic gait. His combat boots stepped on the hard ground with great power. Once a general had an army in his hands, his entire person would undergo an earth-shattering change. The flood dragon entered the sea, and the fierce tiger came out of the cage. He was like a fish in water. The war had only just begun. On a mountain not far from the Snowfire battlefield, there were round igloos that did not fit in with the surrounding environment. Judging from the various traces, it was obvious that they had just been built. Other than humans, there was no other creature that could break the harmony of the environment so thoroughly. Your Holiness, they're fighting, Lord said. The Pope rolled his eyes and said, Is that so? Where? Why can't I see it? Lord was speechless. How could I not see such a huge formation? Do I need you to tell me that? I'm not blind. The Pope glared at Lord with a look of disdain. Lord's chest heaved up and down as he clenched and unclenched his fists. He repeated the process a few times before he managed to suppress the urge to beat the Pope up. Panting heavily, he said, What I mean is, they've started fighting. What should we do? Are we just going to watch? That's right, we're just going to watch, the Pope said matter-of-factly. Are you crazy? Lord said in disbelief. Although he already knew that the Pope was unreliable, his words were still out of Lord's expectations. The Pope was a little surprised by Lord's reaction. He looked at the battlefield and said, What are you trying to do? You want to mediate? Don't joke around. Don't be so rigid. You want to do all the good deeds? Look at the situation. Both sides are fighting until their eyes are red. If you want to mediate, Who cares about you? They probably won't listen to you and will attack you too. The situation is so chaotic. Even if I want to help you after this, there's nothing I can do. Lord finally couldn't take it anymore. He rushed forward and grabbed the Pope's collar, shaking him violently. That's not what I'm talking about. No matter how stupid I am, I still know that I can't get involved in this kind of war. What I'm talking about is, didn't you promise the Iron Blood King that you would treat the wounded on both sides? Have you forgotten? Pay attention to your words, the Pope of the Church of Light. How can you go back on your word? The Pope didn't expect Lord, a bishop, to rush forward like a warrior. He was caught off guard. Ah, you talking about that? I remember. The Pope said helplessly. Really? Lord asked doubtfully. Of course. Didn't you say that the Pope's word is law? If he says he remembers, then he really remembers. Then what do we do now? Lord asked anxiously. Wait. When they send the wounded over, we'll treat them. The Pope said. Lord heard this and looked at the Pope as if he was looking at a demon. He said with a trembling voice, Your so-called treatment, isn't it just us collecting the wounded on the battlefield and treating them? The Pope heard this and looked at Lord like he was looking at an idiot for a few seconds. Then he turned to look at the battlefield. The empty space in front of the two armies had been plowed by both sides' cannons more than 2 or 3 times. It was no longer like before, where the snow and fire were clearly separated. Instead, they were evenly blended together. The entire battlefield was filled with colorful lights. Cannon fire filled the sky, and the sound of explosions never stopped. Occasionally, there would be a particularly large explosion. The flames created by it could illuminate and warm the Pope's face from dozens of miles away. As the strongest human saint, the Pope didn't dare to say that he could completely withstand that kind of attack. And this guy in front of him actually wanted to bring people to charge in, to treat the wounded and the wounded. It's my fault. I shouldn't have left you to those old men when you were young. You become an idiot. The Pope said sympathetically, The dead should be respected. Watch your words. Lord pushed the Pope away and said angrily. The instructor raised his hand, indicating that he didn't mean to insult those who had already passed away. Lord clearly understood the Pope's meaning. I'll sit and watch people rise and fall. I'll just sit and watch. I'll just watch you fight to the death. I don't care. If they can send the wounded over, I'll treat them. If they can't, I won't look for them. This was the smartest thing to do, but it wasn't what the Church of Light in Lord's mind would do. Lord looked at the battlefield and said solemnly, All living beings are suffering and suffering. As believers of the God of Light, we should follow the will of the God and save them from suffering. Although we're not strong enough, we should do our best. Even if we die, we won't regret it. This way, we won't disappoint the God of Light's holy light. After saying that, Lord knelt towards the sky in the direction of the battlefield. He raised his hands and sincerely prayed to the God. He begged the God to save 10 or 20% of the suffering. At this moment, Lord was undoubtedly holy. The sunlight shining on him seemed to be brighter than other places. The believers of the Church of Light who looked at the two from afar couldn't help but kneel as well. When a person was confused and helpless, the bright sunlight that shone on their body would be even warmer. The Church of Light believed that this was the gift of the God of Light. It was for the benefit of all living beings. Suddenly, Lord felt that the gift of the God of Light was blocked by something, cutting off the connection between them. He looked up and saw the Pope standing in front of him. No matter how difficult it is, people should solve their own problems. There's no need to trouble the God, the Pope said. Without the God's recognition and help, how can we save the people from suffering? Father, has your faith changed? Lord's throat felt dry. He hadn't called the Pope Father for many years. After all, it didn't look good for a man in his 70s or 80s to call a man in his 20s father. But that was one thing. The Pope had always been Lord's beloved and respectable father. Now that Lord had called him that without thinking, it was obvious how emotional he was and how he couldn't control himself. Even if you pray to the God, it won't do you any good other than a little comfort. You should be aware of this. Moreover, all living things are born of fire and water. They live in fire and water and die in fire and water. Why do they need others to save them? A fish lives in the water but you're afraid that it will drown and want to save it. You're not a fish. How can you know the joy of a fish? The Pope said, "Are you saying that all living things can't escape this tragic fate?" Lord asked, "No, what I mean is this is life. Birth, aging, sickness, and death, happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy are all part of life. People enjoy it," the Pope said. Lord pointed at the battlefield and asked, "This is enjoying it." Looking back on the bleak place, there's no wind or rain, no sun. "This is a poem from the Middle Empire before the era of the gods," the Pope said. "There's no wind or rain. Could it be that everything was meaningless? Then what should we do?" Lord asked. "Just like true light, it spreads throughout the world. Those who need it can use it as they wish. Those who don't need it can also hide under the roof. No pursuit, no hiding. It won't become brighter because of people's needs, nor will it become dimmer because of people's disgust. It's indestructible. Those who need light will receive our guidance. We are the streetlights on the path of people seeking light. We point the way for passers-by. May all who need light be illuminated by it. May the light last forever." At this moment, the Pope was also the most devout believer, but the object of his faith wasn't the God of light that existed in the teachings, but the light that existed in this world. "May the light last forever," Lord echoed. "May the light last forever," the other churches echoed. Their voices echoed across the entire mountain, sacred and solemn. "May the light last forever, may." Chapter 58. The people of the Church of Light were singing the praises of light on the distant mountains, vowing to guide the people in the direction of light. But the people on the battlefield, whether they were dwarves or humans, had absolutely no intention of looking for light or seeking treatment from the Church of Light at this time. They were fighting bloody battles, regardless of their own safety. In the endless explosions and flames, in a situation where they could die at any time, they still only wanted to attack the enemy and crush them into powder. Then they would crush their bones and scatter their ashes. If before the war, the dwarves were willing to hand over Jilin and his party, or the Snow Wind Empire did not care about the political significance that only humans had, then this war could be avoided. However, since one person on each side died, this war had become a war that could not be avoided, because the two sides had become blood feuds and were absolutely irreconcilable. The war situation that most humans envisioned did not appear. They could not easily crush the dwarves. They did not expect that the dwarves' resistance would be so tough. The strength of the dwarves greatly exceeded people's expectations. The dwarves in their memory, who were proud of forging and obsessed with sword, were gone forever. Now the dwarves were holding all kinds of powerful weapons and shooting at them. Without the protection of the mobile city, only a wave of fire could make the careless humans suffer heavy losses. The humans felt that it was a little unexpected. Didn't they say that the dwarves in the Snow Wind Empire and the dwarves of the Dwarf Kingdom were hostile to each other? Didn't they say that the dwarves of the Dwarf Kingdom advocated tradition and resisted new technology? Then, where did all these strange spears and cannons come from? How was this resisting new technology? This was simply being immersed in it for a long time. Your Majesty, after so many years of hiding your strength and biding your time, the results are really remarkable. Dan said, "Hee, humans still underestimate us dwarves. But you, for the sake of the kingdom, have left your homeland for many years and endured humiliation in the human empire. You have been wronged." The Dwarf King said, "For the sake of the Dwarf Kingdom, it is natural to go through water and tread on fire. Your Majesty has spoken too seriously." Dan said with a smile. The Dwarf King waved his hand and said, "This is too damn fake. Sure enough, after staying with humans for a long time, you can't learn anything good." Dan Mu chuckled and said, "Your Majesty is right. However, His Majesty has been developing in secret for so many years, creating a show of discord between both sides for the Snow Wind Empire to see. To be so cautious, could it be that they had already anticipated today's situation?" The Dwarf King shook his head. Just in case. As a king, how could he completely trust others? How could he not have a backup plan? Besides, after spending so much time with humans, I really can't learn anything good. How would I know this before? Danmu said. The dwarves are only able to achieve what they have today because of your majesty's careful planning and foresight. The dwarf king shook his head again and said, It's all because of the humans' carelessness. My dwarf kingdom has eyes and ears all over the Snow Wind Empire. Every move of the Snow Wind Empire is within my grasp. The Iron Blood King knew all of this, but he never interfered. On the other hand, there are almost none of the spies that the humans have planted among us. This means that the humans don't care about us at all. They think that as long as they want, they can make our dwarf kingdom disappear from the map at any time. Now, the humans have suffered the consequences of their own actions, Danmu said. Humans, sometimes they're indeed arrogant and stupid, but they're definitely not idiots. They dare to look down on us because they have full confidence. The dwarf king moved the city with his finger and said slowly. The moving city suddenly shook, and a few huge metal legs stretched out from the bottom of the city. From afar, it looked like a crab or a spider. But the difference was that the moving city had edges and corners, and the whole body was made of stone and steel. A few metal legs stretched out completely, and they slowly lifted the whole city. Or rather, the moving city stood up. It towered into the clouds. The scene of a city standing up was undoubtedly spectacular and magnificent. At the same time, it brought a huge sense of oppression and impact. Danmu couldn't help but gasp. The Dwarf King was still calm. Looking at the moving city in midair, he asked Danmu in a deep voice, Now, do you think that my decision to go to war was a wrong decision? There is no one else here, so you can say it. For the dwarves, even if I have to go through water and tread on fire, I will not hesitate. Danmu's voice was low, like a heavy stone. It was also like the weight contained in his words. The Dwarf King nodded and didn't say that he was lying this time, adjust the god-slaying cannon. Even if we are really fish, we have to break through his net, the Dwarf King said. Yes, it has been prepared for a long time, and we are just waiting for your majesty's order. Yes. The moving city had started to operate, and the people in the city were doing their jobs and didn't dare to leave their posts. Even the Iron Blood King was the same, because when the moving city was active, running around in the city was undoubtedly a dangerous thing. No one could guarantee that the street you were walking on wouldn't suddenly change direction. The tall wall next to you might suddenly fall on you. The moving city was moving, and the inside of the city was turning upside down. Every building and every street was constantly changing. Most people had already retreated to the core controlled area. Bane was the only one who was moving unsteadily through the empty and ever-changing streets. Bane came to the moving city with Staya. When Staya was received by the Iron Blood King, he was also treated as a guest of honor and was treated with good food and drinks. When Staya was put under house arrest, he was also immediately controlled. From a guest of honor to a prisoner. There was no transition at all. Bane was picked up from the dining table and thrown into a windowless room. Fortunately, he was brought here by the princess of the Saimai Empire, and others were still angry with him. Just a few hours ago, Aisha suddenly appeared in front of him and gave him 2 crystals. Aisha told Bane to find Staya and take her away from this place. Bane thought, why don't you go find her? You come and go so easily, and the defense system that the Snow Wind Empire is so proud of doesn't seem to exist in front of you. Didn't the guard tell me that even mosquitoes can't enter? You can directly take her away and take me away while you are at it. Why do you have to make me come here? Moreover, she might not be willing to go with me. After all, she came here by herself. Without a conclusion, how can she be willing to leave? As for taking Staya away by force, Bane didn't even dare to think about it. The memory of Staya hitting white snow with her shield and sending her flying was still fresh in Bane's mind. But these thoughts, these doubts, these complaints, Bane didn't tell Aisha. Instead, he simply agreed. It was as if he was saying, if there's anything, just say the word, and I'll do it. Because he saw anxiety, solemnity, nervousness on Aisha's face. And it was to the extent that even Aisha couldn't hide it, and Bane could easily see it. These expressions on Aisha's face were too scary. What the hell is going on? Bane felt that even if he, Jilin, and Staya suddenly died, Aisha wouldn't be so agitated. At most, she would be curious about how they died. No, it would be more accurate to say that even if a meteorite destroyed a human empire, Aisha wouldn't be so agitated. At most, she would gently flick her fingernails beside the meteorite crater and say something like, "Humans are so weak," or "Heaven and earth are heartless." If it was the Sinai Empire that was destroyed, Aisha might even be happy. But was such a person that she was so nervous and uneasy now? Bane didn't ask what happened. He didn't want to think about it, and he didn't want to know at all. It was terrifying to think about it. Bane kept moving forward. He still had no idea how to take Staya away, but now he could only take one step at a time. He didn't want to anger Aisha, this dangerous woman. Aisha gave Bane the feeling that she was a swamp with lush aquatic plants and a layer of clear water. From afar, it looked peaceful and beautiful. Once he got close, there was a bloody smell. It was the traces left by countless creatures that sank into the swamp. It turned into nutrients to nourish the aquatic plants. Even though the scenery was beautiful, it was creepy. After Aisha told Bane what to do, she hurriedly teleported away using the teleportation array. Aisha was a smart person. If Bane could think of something, she could naturally think of it too. She also wanted to teleport to Staya and take her away. It would also save Jilin the trouble of finding her. But as long as Staya didn't purposely suppress some of the power of the Book of Light, then Aisha couldn't teleport to Staya's surroundings. Aisha also tried, but now it seemed that Staya didn't care about that. As soon as Aisha came out of the teleportation array, the automatic protection device on her body was activated. A layer of protection covered Aisha's body. It was supposed to be a powerful device to prevent sneak attacks, but it was used up here because it was extremely high up in the sky. There was strong wind and extremely low temperature. The automatic protection device judged that if it wasn't activated, even Aisha's body that was far stronger than a diamond-level warrior couldn't withstand it. It was lonely at the top. The higher it was, the more it was so. Why did Aisha come to such a high place? Of course, it was because of the red-haired young man with wings standing in the air beside her. Jilin and Aisha wanted to pick up Staya and leave after they finished forging weapons, but they happened to see the battle between the humans and the dwarves. Jilin was interested, so he flew here with Aisha and overlooked the entire battlefield. They had been watching for a while. A group of ants, fighting quite happily, Jilin thought. Chapter 59. Jilin stood in the sky, indifferently looking down at the crowd that was bustling with activity, yet clearly separated from each other. The hurricane at a very high altitude was madly hitting his body, but it couldn't shake his clothes at all. In the eyes of others, he was like a god. Although Jilin was very far away from the battlefield, with Jilin's eyesight, as long as he wanted to, he could naturally see everyone's expression clearly. They were like children squatting on the ground, excitedly watching the war of the ant colony. Some people roared angrily while attacking the enemy. Some people were trembling all over, with tears streaming down their faces. They looked very scared, but he still gritted his teeth and insisted on staying in his position, not running away. There were also dwarfs who were seriously injured, bleeding nonstop. He was surrounded by his companions, but no one looked at him. He didn't make any noise himself, but just lay there quietly, waiting for death. Because everyone, including himself, knew that this person was hopeless. Jilin looked down quietly. There were all kinds of people, but here there was only cruelty, only ferocity, only hoarse shouting. The battlefield of raging fire was the hell described in human legends. Devoid of humanity, it was too horrible to look at. But Jilin didn't think so. Not only did he not feel sad, but he even wanted to laugh a little. He was too weak. Countless precious and short lives were squandered away in such a meaningless manner, like flowing water. Why don't you know how to cherish your short lives? Humans always believed that there were many things more important than their lives. Love, country, freedom. In the eyes of humans, it seemed that compared with these beautiful words, life immediately became not worth mentioning. Some people said that if life didn't have love, then it was meaningless and tasteless. Some people said that if you want to live, You should avoid it because of misfortune or fortune. Some people said that if you don't have freedom, you would rather die. In the eyes of humans, life was too worthless. Didn't humans know that life was the prerequisite for these things? Was there a mistake somewhere? According to human words, this was called putting the cart before the horse. Staya had taught him. In Jilin's heart, if life was a plate of delicious braised meat, then things like love were like sugar in meat. Although it was important and indispensable, if there really wasn't, then there was nothing. Braised meat with soy sauce was also delicious, but humans didn't think so. They thought that things like love and freedom were meat. Life was just a plate for meat. When there is nothing on the plate, what is the point of it? Then, when humans who thought like this really went to die for these things like freedom, and when they were on the verge of death, would they really not be afraid and regret? Jilin was very doubtful. Qilin stared at the dwarf lying on the ground waiting for death. Look, he's about to die. He doesn't even have the strength to open his eyes. He should have realized what he was about to face, right? The eternal darkness's self-existence. There was no thought, no feeling, no fear, no pain. Nothing. Nothing. He should be afraid. After all, it was just a weak low-level race that seemed to have only lived for 30 years. He should regret it. It was a big loss to give up his life for his country and race. He should start to call for help. He should start to struggle. What happened after death, the helplessness before death, just thinking about it was enough to make all creatures shudder. Hee, do you feel unreconciled? No, he didn't move. Why was his expression still so calm? Didn't move, still didn't move. Laugh your ass. You are a dying man. What's so funny about watching your teammate load a bomb? Does it still have anything to do with you? You're going to die soon. Do you know that? You should release all your life to struggle now. Use your last bit of strength to persist and live. Even if you can only live for one more second, this is the instinct of living creatures. Why are you lying there quietly with a smile on your face? If you don't do something now, you won't have a chance. Don't you want to express your nostalgia for the world? Don't you want to say your last words? No, sighed dead. Is this dwarf a fool? What a waste of time. Jilin shook his head again and thought in his heart. Father was right. If he didn't cherish his own life, there was no need for others to cherish him. Just as Jilin was looking at the battlefield thoughtfully, Aisha appeared beside him. Jilin tilted his head and said, Yo, you're back. Yeah, where did you go? Aisha moved the city with her finger and said, Let's go inside. Oh, Jilin's eyes seemed to be shining. Aisha, on the other hand, wanted to slap herself. How is it inside? Sure enough, Jilin asked curiously. Nothing special, Aisha said. Jilin looked at the city that they were walking on foot and said with some doubt, It shouldn't be, right? Why shouldn't it be? Humans are always like this. They are constantly innovating in some areas and making rapid progress. But in other areas, they are stubborn and refuse to change. They want to change, but they don't dare to change completely. They're always so timid and fearful. They're always so clingy when doing things. Isn't it normal for humans to have a lot of old things in a brand new thing? Aisha said. Makes sense. Jilin nodded and agreed with Aisha. Aisha sighed in relief. Then let's go find Staya and the others, Jilin suggested. Aisha immediately sighed in her heart. Her painstaking efforts to persuade him had all been in vain. Are we not going to watch anymore? Aisha asked with some hope. No, a group of weak and idiotic creatures. They don't know fear even when death is near. Boring, Jilin said. Jilin said and flapped his wings and flew out instantly, causing a violent sonic boom. It was like a clap of thunder. Aisha hurriedly covered her ears, but she was still a little slow. Her eardrums hurt from the vibration, but Aisha was a little glad. If there was no automatic protection device, her eardrums would have exploded directly. Aisha furrowed her brows. Eventually, she sighed and followed him. A clap of thunder suddenly sounded in the sky. If it was in normal times, it would be enough to scare the pedestrians on the road. However, in this kind of battlefield where artillery fire filled the sky, it would only be treated as an ordinary explosion and naturally ignored. It should be like this. Jilin released all his strength without hiding. Scales appeared on his body, and there seemed to be golden flames rising in his eyes. The surging dragon force seemed to have directly punched everyone's chests. It made the clap of thunder seem to explode in their ears. On the battlefield, whether dwarves or humans, it seemed that everyone's heart skipped a beat. Everyone couldn't help but stop what they were doing. Their fingers were on the button, but they couldn't press it. The sharp blade was hanging over the enemy's head, but they forgot to stab it down. The enemy also forgot to roll away from the sharp blade. It seemed that time suddenly stopped, and the picture on the battlefield was frozen at this moment. Everyone looked up, and everyone knew that something was coming. Above the sky, a red comet crossed the sky. It was about to fall into the moving city. The frozen picture was broken, and the dwarves immediately began to cheer. What did it mean to be unjust and bring about self-destruction? What did it mean to be self-inflicted? What did it mean to have eyes? They had never believed the nonsense of humans before, but today they really believed it. Humans used their strength to bully the weak, shamelessly tore up the alliance, and invaded their country. Now that they were seen by God, they immediately sent down divine punishment. A red meteorite fell and hit the moving city. It was really a direct divine punishment. They just didn't know which God was so wise. Jilin's purpose was achieved. When the megalosaurus appeared, it should be the focus of attention, and all living beings should look up. It didn't matter if you were fighting for your life or not. When he heard the dwarves cheering, Jilin couldn't help but smile. What a sensible race. Since it appeared in such a high-profile way, it naturally couldn't escape any investigation. It's him, he's here. Main cannon, bright snow, sage-grade weapon in position, full protective shield, don't let him in. The Duke stood on the rooftop and shouted orders. The main show was finally here, the Duke thought to himself. Although the order was still clear, those who were familiar with the Duke could hear a trace of panic in the Duke's voice. Why would he panic? It was because he didn't believe in his own strength. Now, the Duke had what could be called the most powerful and advanced steel force of mankind. It was reasonable to say that at this time, the Duke's mentality should be that, as long as these brothers are here, even if I enter the palace of the King of Hell, I dare to pluck out 3 tiger whiskers. However, in the face of the red comet, the Duke actually felt that his strength was not enough. One had to know that this was a kind of power that could move mountains and fill seas, and it didn't even need to have an endless supply of descendants. Although everyone had doubts in their hearts, they did not hesitate to carry out the Duke's order. This was the instinct and trust developed from years of war. An unprecedentedly huge white energy beam shot towards the red comet. At this time, the dwarves realized that the humans didn't use their full strength before. In the face of such a powerful energy beam, presumably, no matter what kind of meteorite it would only end up in an instant. Humans already had enough power to fight against the gods. This was the judgment of countless dwarven weapon masters. Presumably, it was not wrong. Chapter 60. The mobile city's main cannon fired its most powerful attack at the fast-moving meteorite in the sky. Looking from afar, a white ray of light soared into the sky. The speed was extremely fast, and everyone clearly knew how exaggerated the destructive power of that beautiful ray of light was. It gave people the feeling of the seraph in human legends, the sword of judgment that was always burning and would never be extinguished. It was enough to cut through the dark sky and pierce through all despair, bringing hope and light to mankind. This was the sword of judgment of mankind. Mankind was already able to bring light and hope to themselves. The Snow Wind Empire believed that nothing could stop the sword of judgment, just like no one could stop the Empire's bright future. Under everyone's gaze, the sword of judgment finally met the meteorite. However, the scene of the meteorite immediately turning into a firework didn't happen as expected as people imagined. That meteorite suppressed the sword of judgment, not to mention turning into a firework. Even its speed and direction did not change in the slightest. The sword of judgment that mankind was full of confidence and seemed to have turned into a pure beam of light in front of that meteorite. There was no lethality, so it could only be easily blocked by others and kept getting shorter. The meteorite was still falling, just like the Sword of Judgment. There was no difference whether it was there or not. This was naturally because Jilin had opened his domain. Within 2 meters of him, only the fire element could exist, and everything else would be annihilated. The Sword of Judgment was eliminated before it could touch Jilin. This was the reason for this shocking scene. All the humans were dumbfounded and stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. Only one person was an exception. The Duke roared, "Open the protective shield with all your strength." For this scene, the Duke had already faintly expected it, but he did not dare to think too deeply about it. Now that it really appeared in front of him, the Duke was naturally not as shocked as the others, but more of a feeling of as expected, or good things don't come true, bad things come true. Hearing the Duke's roar, everyone instantly moved, and the protective shield of the mobile city instantly became solid. The originally faint purple color had now become somewhat black, but from a distance, one could feel a sense of heaviness. It could be said to be impregnable. However, in the face of the meteorite falling from the sky, no one had the slightest confidence in this protective shield. He was just doing his best and leaving the rest to fate. The meteorite hit the protective shield at an extremely high speed, producing a loud bang. The protective shield did not break, and the meteorite did not turn into a firework. Instead, it miraculously stopped in front of the protective barrier after hitting it. The meteorite floated steadily in the air and did not fall. The blinding light began to weaken, and only then did people see clearly that it wasn't a meteorite, but a humanoid creature with wings on its back. No one knew what it was, but it wasn't human. The Pope's face became serious, which was rare for him. He stared at the sky in the distance and said, "They're here." Lord was startled by the Pope's sudden seriousness. Without thinking, he asked, "What's coming?" "Naturally, the Red Calamity, our target this time," the Pope replied. As soon as the Pope's voice trailed off, the red meteorite whistled through the clouds and fell towards the moving city. The mobile city's reaction was very fast, and the attacks it launched made the Pope somewhat fearful. But it was useless. In the Pope's eyes, the light was more like a guide for the meteorite. Then, the meteorite crashed into the protective shield. The loud noise caused the snow under the Pope's feet to visibly shake. The protective shield trembled violently, but in the end, it did not break. Lord looked at this scene and swallowed hard. The corners of his eyes could not stop twitching. However, the first sentence he said was not to be shocked by Jilin's strength, nor was it to praise the Snow Wind Empire's preparations. Instead, it was the witches were hiding such strength. The protective shield that blocked the terrifying meteorite was flowing with purple light. All the humans on the continent, as long as they were not blind, could easily and clearly determine that it was the work of the witches from the color. But the problem was, such a protective shield that covered the entire city was not a small project, even for the witches, who knew how much manpower and material resources it would take. And the witches had been suppressed by the Church of Light for many years, so it was reasonable to say that they should not have this ability. This matter may not be important to others, but to Lord, who had been in charge of the Church of Light for many years, this was a huge problem. It seemed to be bigger than the Sword of Judgment that had been hidden in the Snow Wind Empire for many years. It was also bigger than Jilin, who was like a divine punishment, bringing with it a terrifying power that descended upon the world. The Pope glanced at him, shook his head, and did not say anything. One cannot see Mount Tai when one is blinded by a leaf. People would always be blinded by some insignificant things and neglect the truly important things. But it was not Lord's fault. Only the Pope knew what Lord had experienced during the years he had been in charge of the Church of Light. The place where the sun shone the brightest was also the place where the shadows were the darkest. As the Sacred King said, the Red Calamity is really enough to transform into a shadow that shrouds the entire human race. We should join the battle. The Pope looked at the humanoid creature floating in the air. Lord only then realized that the Pope did not agree to the people entering the battlefield to save the wounded. It turned out that he wanted to preserve his strength at this moment. To think that he could talk so much nonsense in order to stall for time. Jilin stood in the air, staring blankly at the purple in front of him. He rubbed his dizzy head with his hand. How strange. This thing was not destroyed by his domain. It was clearly not a fire elemental thing. He actually hit his head on it. It was a little embarrassing, but fortunately, no one saw it. Jilin glanced at the humans in the protective shield. They all looked like they had seen a ghost. Jilin was very satisfied because no one showed any signs of wanting to laugh. Jilin was thinking too much. Not to mention that he was wrapped in the red light and no one could see him. Even if they really saw Jilin hit his face on the protective shield, he believed that no one would be able to laugh at this moment. After all, the threat of death was only a wall away from him. The demon-like creature was casually glancing at him from the outside, like a farmer looking at the chickens in the chicken coop. Why would a farmer deliberately walk to the chicken coop to look at the chickens inside, or to check the number of chickens to see if there were any missing, or to see if there were any eggs, or to think about which one to kill for tonight's dinner? This was the thought that came into the farmer's mind when he looked at his chickens. Looking at the demon-like creature outside and the humans inside, it probably wanted to kill them all. Jilin saw the Duke, who was in a very conspicuous position and dressed in a very high-profile manner. Yo, he raised his hand and greeted him. The veins on the Duke's forehead kept bulging. As if facing a great enemy, he did not dare to move. Jilin saw that the Duke was ignoring him, but he did not mind. He used his finger to gently knock on the protective shield in front of him. The protective shield suddenly made a dull dong sound. This knock on the protective shield, and at the same time, it also knocked on the tense nerves of everyone inside the shield. Finally, a soldier could not bear the pressure brought by Jilin. He turned his gun and fired at Jilin through the protective shield. The protective shield produced by the witches was very magical and kind. It did not block the attack from the inside. The bullet smoothly passed through the protective shield and hit Jilin's body. Countless sparks gradually appeared. Jilin raised his hand, and an orange-red flame ignited from his hand. Jilin stretched his hand in front of the protective shield. The shield immediately began to melt at a speed visible to the naked eye. Jilin thought that since the domain could not be broken down, he could only burn it. Soon, a hole large enough for a person to pass through was melted into the shield. Jilin slowly floated in. Sparks continued to appear on his body. He floated in front of the soldier who fired at him and looked at the weapon that was spitting out fire snakes with interest. Finally, he curiously stretched out his index finger and flicked it. The energy rapid-fire cannon was instantly shattered. The same happened to the soldiers behind. A large piece of the platform at the highest point of the mobile city was dyed red. Attack! Wait! Two voices sounded almost at the same time. The first word, attack, was naturally shouted by the Duke. As a soldier, he did not lack the quality of struggling to survive in a desperate situation. He also had the determination to perish together with the enemy in order to protect his country. Therefore, even if he knew how invincible Jilin was, he still gave the order to attack. Soldiers, no matter how they died on the battlefield, it would not be a pity, except for waiting for death. But no one moved. They did not follow the Duke's very correct order, because the second word, wait, was said by their emperor. The Iron Blood King walked up the stairs. Your Majesty, the Duke's eyes were about to burst. The Duke had never thought that the Iron Blood King would face this monster directly. No one dared to say what unspeakable things would happen in the next second. But the Iron Blood King was very calm. He looked at Jilin and said, I've heard a lot about you. Jilin did not expect that he was so famous. His mood suddenly became much better. He said to the Iron Blood King, you don't have to be nervous. I don't mean any harm, and I don't want to interfere in the war between you and the dwarves. The Iron Blood King turned his head and looked at the blood splattered all over the ground like plum blossoms. His face slightly darkened, but he did not say anything. Jilin said to himself, I just want to take my partner away. Her name is Staya. You should know that she is the princess of your human race. Bring her to me, and I will leave. The Iron Blood King was about to open his mouth when he heard a voice from the sky. No. Jilin looked up angrily. Who was so arrogant? Was there no way to negotiate? A man fell from the sky in front of Jilin's eyes and stood side by side with the Iron Blood King. It was the Pope. Jilin looked at the white-haired young man. Why did he look so familiar? Chapter 61. Jilin frowned and thought for a while. This person should be the one that Aisha mentioned a while ago. There didn't seem to be anything special about him. What did you just say? Jilin pretended not to hear him for Aisha's sake and gave the Pope a chance to reorganize his words. Staya is the princess of the Simai Empire and the saintess of the Church of Light. You want to take her away with just a few words? Aren't you being a little too arrogant? The Pope said. Jilin was shocked. He didn't expect this person to be so tactless and stupid. He was Aisha's friend. Jilin hesitated and said, "What did you just say?" The Pope tilted his head and looked at Jilin for a while. "Are you deaf?" Jilin was stunned for a moment. How did this person know? Then he realized that this person was scolding him and sneered. Jilin stomped his foot on the ground, and his figure instantly disappeared. With a rumbling sound, a huge pit appeared at the place where he originally stood. Jilin instantly appeared in front of the Pope and kicked him. Jilin's movements were so fast that no one could see his figure clearly. Even the Pope, one of the most powerful people in the world, couldn't react in time and was kicked hard. His whole body flew out and fell to the ground, rolling back continuously. The Pope steadied himself and half-knelt on the ground. He was in a sorry state. How many years has it been since I last met an enemy? The Pope thought to himself as he resisted the urge to vomit blood. The Duke took a deep breath and held the hilt of his sword tightly with his right hand. Even the Pope, who was known as the most powerful human saint, couldn't resist a little. Jilin was also puzzled. In his mind, this kick should have made a hole in the Pope's stomach and sent his organs flying. He didn't die. It seemed that he was quite capable. Just as Jilin was about to step forward and kick him, a black light fell from the sky like a meteor and landed between the Pope and Jilin. Aisha finally caught up. This person is mine. I have a grudge against him, Aisha said to Jilin without turning her head. Then wouldn't it be more convenient for me to help you? Jilin felt a little strange, because in his mind, Aisha didn't seem like a person who would kill her enemy with her own hands. She was more like the kind of woman who would do anything to achieve her goals. Jilin would believe that she would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. However, Jilin did not believe in such a straightforward and ordinary way of revenge. Aisha ignored Jilin and directly activated the force teleportation array. A black hole appeared above the Pope's head, and a powerful suction force was about to suck him in. The Pope wanted to resist, but there was nothing he could do. He was instantly sucked in. Aisha nodded to Jilin as she saw that the matter was settled. She also jumped into the black hole. The black hole closed and disappeared. The Tianai Square was completely silent. Jilin thought to himself, "What is the meaning of this? What do you mean by nodding? I don't understand at all, okay?" Jilin blinked his eyes and decided not to think about this unsolvable question. He looked at the Iron Blood King and said, "Give me Staya." The Iron Blood King slowly shook his head. Jilin took a deep breath and walked towards the Iron Blood King. All the soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, ready to attack at any moment. The soldiers were prepared to sacrifice themselves for a noble cause, but the Iron Blood King still didn't give the order to attack. Because a person passed by the Iron Blood King from behind and stood in front of him. This person's entire body was shrouded in a gray tattered cloak, so no one could see his appearance clearly. However, this person still attracted everyone's attention. It was related to his current actions. Everyone was curious as to what kind of person dared to stand in front of that monster after the Pope was kicked to the ground, protecting the Emperor behind him and blocking disaster in front of him. At the same time, it was also related to his clothes. His cloak wasn't like the Duke's cloak that could block the wind and snow. Instead, it was made of very thin cloth that fluttered crazily in the wind and snow. This kind of thing often appeared in the deserts of the Nanshin Kingdom because it could block the wind, sand, and scorching sun without increasing the body heat too much. However, it couldn't block the wind, snow, and cold. Therefore, this kind of thing could be said to be rare in the Snow Wind Empire. After all, no one would go out with an extra blanket just because the weather was too cold at -40 or 50 degrees Celsius. That was extremely disrespectful to nature and human intelligence. This person, who was stupid and awesome in the eyes of the people of the Snow Wind Empire, raised his fist and rushed towards Jilin. The cloak on his body was pulled straight in an instant, tightly sticking to his body, revealing an exaggerated muscular outline. Like a hot knife through butter, his momentum was magnificent and thunderous. Even the Duke was shocked by this shocking momentum, but Jilin didn't see him at all. He only stared at the Iron Blood King. He was arrogant and nothing more, but it was also reasonable. It was like a human squatting on the ground and staring at an ant in a colony. He wouldn't notice that another ant was running towards him. If that ant wanted to attract the human's attention, unless that ant was strong enough to lift the human up and throw him out. This was impossible. However, humans were better than other creatures because they had the possibility of making the impossible possible. The fist wrapped in bandages landed on Jilin's face. With a loud bang, smoke and dust rose up. Jilin flew out in the smoke, leaving a long trail behind him. This punch actually sent Jilin flying out of the mobile city's range. If it was a human, he would probably only be able to fall from high altitude and shatter into pieces. At most, during the process of falling, he would reminisce about his ordinary life, but at the same time, there were still some highlights in his life. Other than that, there was nothing else he could do. But just as humans had advantages over ants, dragons also had advantages over humans. The most obvious one was that dragons could fly. Jilin only flipped his body in the air and stabilized his body with a flap of his wings. He raised his hand to rub his neck and tilted his head to look at the person below. He thought to himself that among the thousands of humans, there would always be a few who stood out from the masses. This human had successfully attracted Jilin's attention. That person pulled off his cloak with one hand and waved it in the wind and snow. He raised his head to look at Jilin and proudly shouted, "Don't look down on humans, you monster." Logically speaking, seeing this scene and hearing this sentence, the humans should be in high spirits and cheering. They should share the glory. But the people of the Snow Wind Empire couldn't cheer. Everyone's expression was very strange. They couldn't tell if they were happy or sad. It was like a starving person eating a mouthful of half-cooked rice with sand. It was impossible to vomit, but it was very disgusting, because that person's upper body was naked under the cloak. His pants were also very light martial arts clothes. The people of the Snow Wind Empire had never seen someone who looked down on winter. Just by looking at him, a chill seemed to surge out from their bones, and their teeth couldn't help but tremble. This person is the legendary expert of the Nanshin Empire, the Emperor of Physique, Musin. There were also people who saw this outfit and not only felt cold, but also thought of the legends on the continent. Legend had it that Musin was a legendary expert who had reached the peak of physique training. He was always bare-chested and only wore light clothes. He used the harsh natural environment to train his physique to the greatest extent. Some people said that he once fought barehanded with a 9th-rank King Kong beast and didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. In the end, he even won. This caused the huge King Kong beast to flee. He arrogant. Don't look down on humans? Jilin couldn't help but laugh. Then tell me, what do humans have that is worthy of my attention? Come down, my fist will make you understand. Musin roared. Don't act rashly. This monster was caught off guard and took your punch. To think that he is unharmed. It looks like the Red Disaster lives up to its reputation. A 2-meter-tall bald man holding a large shield said with a frown as he walked over to Musin's side. This bald man knew that even he, who was known for his defense, could not take Musin's attack head-on. I know, Musin said sullenly. This showed that he did not lose his cool or underestimate his opponent. How much strength did you use in that punch earlier? A red-clad girl asked as she silently appeared beside Musin. I used all my strength in every punch, Musin said. That's true. As the Duke looked at the two, he thought, to think that a legendary expert appeared. The Saimai Empire's legendary expert, Holy Wall Jiashu. The Divine Dragon Empire's legendary expert, the Red Dragon Knight, Flay. They're all famous people on the continent. Could this be His Majesty's and Bei Luo's trump card? Is this enough to protect His Majesty? The Duke was still somewhat uncertain. Hence, he called over a soldier and asked, "How much longer will it take to reach the bright snow divine weapon? We already used the entire mobile city's energy to charge it. The Church of Light people already went over when the Pope arrived. It will take about 10 more minutes." 10 minutes. As the Duke looked at the 3 legendary experts before him, he felt somewhat more confident. That should be about right. Jilin slowly descended from the sky. Jiashu held up his large shield and stood in front of the two, waiting solemnly. The moment Jilin landed, Muzin passed by Jiashu and charged at Jilin. "Don't!" Jiashu shouted, wanting to step forward to stop Muzin. Normally, he should be the one to initiate the fight. However, Flay held him back. "Just testing the waters. He won't die," Flay said seriously. Muzin punched Jilin's face again. This time, Jilin still did not dodge, nor did he defend. Instead, he took the punch head-on. This time, he slid back less than half a step. Jilin smiled faintly and raised his hand to return the punch. Muzin also took a punch from Jilin. This punch landed on Muzin's abdomen. Muzin immediately sucked in a sharp breath. He could not help covering his abdomen with both hands as he felt his knees. He could not stop sucking in cold air. "Hey, what's wrong? Didn't you say not to underestimate humans?" Jilin mocked as he looked down at Muzin. Jiashu wanted to step forward, but Flay did not let go of him. This is just the beginning. Muzin took a few deep breaths and struggled to stand up. He looked at Jilin and said, "That's right. Don't underestimate humans." Chapter 62. Jilin looked at Muzin, who was struggling to stand up, and could not help but find it funny. He was willing to spend some time with this slightly stronger human. Thus, Jilin gestured at Muzin with his finger and said, "If you just stand there and don't move, it'll just be empty words." "I know." Muzin roared and charged forward. He used all his strength to throw out another punch. It was as if the surrounding space was trembling because of this punch, and a loud sound was produced. The people with lower realms could not help but cover their ears tightly, but their bodies could naturally feel the tremors. Muzin's famous skill, the mountain-quaking fist. His fist brought about intense tremors, and it could shatter mountains and rocks. Naturally, it could also shatter enemies. Moreover, those who cultivated it to the highest level could even shake mountains. Jilin was still unmoved by this terrifying punch. He didn't even try to dodge it. Jilin took this punch, and his upper body could not help but lean back. However, his feet were still firmly nailed to the ground, as if they were rooted to the ground. "Not bad," Jilin praised. Then, he threw out a punch. Muzin's eyes bulged, and his body slid back. However, after sliding for 2 steps, he was stopped by Muzin. Although he looked much better now, Muzin's injuries were much more than much. "That's all," Muzin said. "A human's mouth." Jilin could not help but shake his head. Then, he looked at Muzin seriously and said, "Is this the talent of your race? No matter how big the difference in strength is, you will never be at a disadvantage when it comes to words. Regardless of whether it's a so-called legendary powerhouse or an ordinary person, there are no exceptions." Muzin ignored him. His body glowed with a golden light, and a heavy and domineering aura spread out. It was Muzin's self-created technique, the Emperor Body technique. "Huh!" Muzin turned into a golden light and punched Jilin's abdomen with the tip of his fist. Jilin took half a step back with one foot. "Not bad, not bad," Jilin said as he punched. This time, Mu Xian also took half a step back with one foot. It did not matter whether he was forcing himself or not. Then, Mu Xian's fist turned into a storm and attacked Jilin's body like raging waves. The crowd could not see Muzin's hands at all. They could only see countless rays of golden light. Jilin followed Muzin's rhythm and attacked him. Not one punch more, not one punch less. Furthermore, he managed to avoid Muzin's fists with every punch. The attacks between the two were as intense as a tsunami. With the two of them as the center, a wild hurricane was set off. "What do you mean by going all out with every punch? Aren't you holding back?" Flay could not help but ridicule. "No, Each of Muzin's punches is above Muzin's full strength, Jiaxiu said in a deep voice as he watched the two fighting. Fry curled her lips and did not say anything else. How could she not see through this? It was just that the current atmosphere was too heavy, and he couldn't help but want to say something. The fight between the two made her a little nervous. Jiaxiu's mood wasn't as heavy as Flace. He just stared at the two of them without blinking, as if he was afraid to miss any scene. That was the enemy's information that Muzin had risked his life to obtain. Every punch hit the flesh. There was no hiding, no dodging, no defending. They would fight to the death. A black hole quietly opened up above the snowy plains. The Pope and Aisha landed on the snowy ground one after another. They looked at each other and did not say anything for a long time. Only when the never-ending snowstorm of the snow wind empire passed between the two of them and blew at their clothes did the scene seem more vivid. Otherwise, the onlookers would think that the two of them were statues standing there. A loud sound came from a moving city in the distance. Smoke and dust rose. That was the punch that Muzin had used to send Jilin flying. The Pope looked over and finally took the lead to break the silence. I have to go. Don't stop me. When this matter is over, I can accompany you for a few days. Be good and move aside. Scram. Aisha frowned and said coldly when she heard the Pope's ambiguous tone. Hey, why are you so stubborn? If you continue to be like this, I will be serious. Hurry up and move aside. The Pope took out his staff. However, anyone could tell that he was trying to put up a strong front. Aisha smiled contemptuously and said, You can try. At the same time, a fist-sized black crystal fell into Aisha's hand. Is there a need to go to this extent? The Pope said softly. He seemed to be a little weak. This was because he recognized that crystal. It could be said to be Aisha's treasure. Back then, in order to help Aisha make this work, he had spent a lot of effort and suffered a lot. Thinking about it now, he still felt that the past was unbearable. Therefore, he was very clear about the effects of this item. This work was called Dark Crystal Maze. It was Aisha's most powerful trapping method. Others might not know, but if it was to trap him, it would not be a problem for him to be trapped for 2 hours. In the past, the Pope was naturally not afraid. Even if Aisha trapped him for 2 years, it would be fine. He might even be able to rely on Aisha. However, he could not do that now. It was obvious that the other side had started fighting. He was an extremely important part of the plan. He could not let anything happen to him. If he was really trapped by Aisha for 2 hours, everything would be over. The Pope's eyes rolled quickly. Suddenly, he covered his chest with his hands and spat out a mouthful of blood. A large patch of red appeared on the white snow. The Pope fell to the ground. His face was frighteningly pale. He could not catch his breath and was panting nonstop. What's wrong with you? Aisha asked coldly with her arms crossed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She thought to herself, how dare he use such a childish trick? Did he really think that I would fall for it? This monster is really strong. I didn't expect, just one kick, to be so heavily injured. The Pope stuttered. As he spoke, he spat out 2 more mouthfuls of blood. His breath was weak. Finally, he fell to the ground. Hey, stop pretending. You know that I won't fall for it. Since you know that the enemy is strong and invincible, don't ask for more trouble. Can't you hear me talking to you? Stop pretending. It's useless. I won't let you go. Hey, don't tell me you really didn't defend yourself. Aisha looked at the Pope, lying there motionlessly. She could not help but doubt her judgment. She was very clear about Jilin's strength. If the Pope really did not defend himself, he would have been kicked by Jilin. Then, it would be very normal for him to be kicked to death. Even if the Pope was a legendary powerhouse, he was still a weak mage. He was not like Muzin who could fight with Jilin. Aisha slowly walked forward and carefully grabbed the Pope's wrist. It was different for what she remembered. She felt cold when she touched it. Aisha instantly knew that the Pope's injury was real. He really needed to lie down, but not in the snow. Actually, I defended myself, but I couldn't block it all. The Pope looked at Aisha and said weakly, What are you laughing at? Aisha frowned. I didn't expect that before I die, I would be with you. Before this was something that I never even dreamed of. It's really unpredictable. Now I'm sure I'm really favored by the God of Light, Thank you, God of Light, for letting you stay by my side in the end. Aisha, I've always wanted to tell you, you are the light that the God of Light has given me. The Pope tried hard to say something like his last words. It was as if he would take his last breath at any time. Aisha's eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She gently pulled the Pope into her arms. Don't say any more. You won't die. Also, I'm here now. It has nothing to do with your God of Light. The Pope reached out with difficulty and hugged Aisha's waist. He buried his face in Aisha's soft chest and rubbed it twice. He let out an extremely reluctant sigh. I'm sorry, the Pope said with a trembling voice. He held Aisha's hands even more tightly. An extremely dazzling white magic circle instantly opened up with the Pope as the center. Aisha was hugged by the Pope so naturally she could not react. She was enveloped by this magic circle. Holy cage! Anyone who was enveloped by the holy light of this magic circle was like a bird in a cage. In here, the witch's power will be suppressed to the greatest extent. You don't have to struggle. When the time is up, it will dissipate. The Pope said softly and stood up at the same time. Aisha did not show any anger at being deceived. She just looked at the Pope seriously and said, Your injuries are really serious. You really can't beat him. What she meant was that the situation was already very obvious. The Pope and the legendary masters were just foolishly digging their own graves. Humans, there are also people who do things even though they know it's impossible. This way of living is either extremely stupid or forced. You have other choices. The Pope smiled and shook his head. I do as I wish. I am who I am. Why? Why don't you change your mind when you know the result will not be good? Is this really what you want? Aisha asked. The Pope looked at Aisha again and sighed. Then he simply turned around and walked away. He did not look back and said, How can everything be as you wish? I just want to have a clear conscience. Aisha lowered her head as if giving up. There was no common ground between people who walked different paths. She had already given up on persuading the Pope. You will regret it. Aisha whispered. When I lied to you, I actually already regretted it. The Pope said, You lied to me just now? Aisha asked. Only the fact that I'm about to die was a lie. The Pope said, Then I'm really sorry. Aisha said, What do you mean? The Pope did not stop walking and kept walking away. Just now I was lying to you. Aisha's voice sounded, but it no longer came from behind the Pope. The Pope, who had not stopped walking, suddenly froze on the spot. He stared at the figure of Aisha, who slowly appeared outside the magic circle. The Pope turned around abruptly. Aisha, who was sitting on the ground, had unknowingly turned into a wooden doll. The Pope slowly turned around and looked at Aisha, who was outside the magic circle. He could not help but lower his head and touch his forehead. He said softly, Damn. Chapter 63. The Pope's mood was as messy as a snowflake in the wind. The Pope lowered his head and cursed, then angrily pointed his trembling finger at Aisha, unable to speak for a long time. You, what about me? Aisha was calm and looked at the Pope from the corner of her eyes. You treacherous woman. The Pope shouted in an exaggerated tone, full of grievance. It was as if he had never thought of deceiving Aisha, but Aisha had simply deceived him. Aisha was naturally unmoved, this kind of thing that the whole world knows. Why do you need to shout it out so loudly? You're too stupid, Aisha mocked. You're a light believer who believes in honesty every day, and you actually want to deceive a witch who specializes in bewitching people? This is really showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. I really don't know what you're thinking. You're using your weakness to attack my strength. Are you looking down on me? How could I look down on you? The Pope muttered softly. I just heard that a woman in love will become stupid, so I wanted to try. You wanted to see if you could deceive me? Aisha said. No, I wanted to see if you have fallen in love with me. The Pope said. And the result? It doesn't seem to be good? Can it be, even if my IQ is lower, it's still higher than yours? Aisha now had the time and the mood to joke. This was the unique calmness of someone who thought that she had the situation under control. No, someone told me that a woman in love has 0 IQ. The Pope stubbornly said. Didn't that person tell you that a man in love has a negative IQ? Aisha said. The Pope suddenly fell into silence. Frowning, he seriously pondered. There really wasn't such a sentence. Yeah, but there seemed to be another sentence after that. What was it? Aisha looked at the Pope, who was in deep thought, and couldn't help but shake her head. This person was so unpredictable. His thoughts were so drifting. Regardless of the occasion, regardless of the time. If you don't stop him, his thoughts will definitely drift to the higher ethereal realm and definitely won't come back for a while. In the past, this would have been a headache, but now, it was exactly what Aisha wanted. Just as the pontiff was thinking about how he could beat Lord up without making him retaliate, two loud explosions rang out from the moving city. Then there was silence. Then an endless series of explosions came crashing down like an explosion. The Pope suddenly became alert. His first thought was not to regret for wasting time, but to think of the time many years ago when he was in the endless forest with Aisha. At that time, Aisha always told herself that she had to change her habit of being absent-minded. Otherwise, sooner or later, she would make a mistake because of this shortcoming. When that time came, she would regret it for the rest of her life. But he had lived. The popes. They were all trivial matters that could not be taken into account, be it the empire or the Church of Light. So what if he, the Pope, did not manage the religious affairs for decades? People in the religion thought that although he was wandering outside, he had always been concerned about the religion and knew it like the back of his hand. He really did not know what those people were thinking. Maybe they used the name of the God of Light to deceive people. After deceiving so many people, they could easily deceive him. I've been in charge of the Pope's affairs for decades, so I don't know anything about religion. Yet, none of them dared to even think about the possibility of it happening. Not a single one of them doubted that I've been such a hands-off leader. How laughable. Thinking of this, the Pope could not help but chuckle. I really don't know how someone like you became the Pope. Aisha's voice was full of doubt. The Pope woke up again. Then, he found that he was distracted again. Damn, why is it that the more dangerous it is, the easier it is to be distracted? The Pope thought. The Pope began to walk towards Aisha, step by step. Aisha put away her playful mood and looked at the Pope seriously. No matter what, she could not let the Pope rush into that stormy battlefield. The bodies of mages were always weak. Stop. You can't go any further. Aisha clenched the crystal maze, ready to activate it at any time. However, the Pope was not moved at all. He continued to walk forward at the same pace. He looked at Aisha and said, "It's not your style to threaten someone like that. Under normal circumstances, you would have used the crystal maze to trap me without saying anything. You wouldn't have said so much to me and added so many variables for no reason. This is really not like you." So, Aisha tilted her head and asked, "I'm guessing that the crystal in your hand is a fake. The real crystal maze should have been used by you long ago. You're just bluffing." The Pope walked out of the bright magic circle and stood in front of Aisha. His holy robes and perfect face made him look like a god who had walked out of the divine realm of light. Elsa looked at the Pope with a conflicted expression. She wanted to say something, but she stopped. The Pope raised his hand to pat Aisha's head, but Aisha simply waved away his hand. The Pope sighed, thinking to himself that this should be the real thing. Thus, the Pope said to Aisha seriously, "Don't worry. To be honest, after living for so many years, I'm a little tired of living. There aren't many things in this world that could surprise me. Now that such a powerful creature has suddenly appeared, I must go and take a look. No need to flatter me. You just can't let go of those so-called sentient beings." Aisha exposed him. The Pope raised his hand and rubbed his head. He stopped joking and said slowly, "It's fine. This time, we've made ample preparations. The lineup is unprecedentedly strong. Many empires have worked together, and many legends have come. Saimai Empire's Holy Wall, Jashu. Divine Dragon Empire's Red Dragon, Flay. Southern Exian Empire's Body Monarch, Musin. Middle Empire's Sword Saint, Gai Mingwe. With me, we are confident of fighting against any enemy. Furthermore, the Snow Wind Empire also has a backup plan. We might not lose. You will die," Aisha said with certainty. The Pope was rendered speechless by Aisha's words. "Your cultivation talent is excellent. In a long history of witches, you are also an unparalleled genius. You should have entered the legendary stage long ago. However, you have been trying to overthrow the Church of Light all these years, running all over the continent. Hence, the many mysteries of the legendary stage are not something you can understand, the Pope said. Even so, you will still die. Jilin is at least a god. Just his realm alone is above yours. Furthermore, humans have always been one whole realm above magical beasts before they can fight on equal terms, Aisha said. If it is as you say, then I can die without regrets. The Pope took 2 steps and passed by Aisha, arriving behind Aisha. His body started to glow from the inside out. Eventually, his entire body turned into a ball of light. Then, the ball of light scattered into countless spots of light and flew in the direction of the mobile city. This was the Pope's trump card for escaping, turning into light and creating thousands of clones. Who could catch light? Who could hurt light? This was the Pope showing his trump card to Aisha. He hoped that Aisha would have more confidence in him and worry less. The crystal in Aisha's hand slowly started to glow. However, it eventually returned to normal. Since you're not afraid of death and insist on going, I will not stop you. However, I will do my best to protect you and try not to let you die. Aisha thought to herself. The thunderous sounds created by Jilin and Muzin's attacks slowly became softer. This was a sign that one of them was starting to become weak. The rain had just stopped. The 2 figures appeared in front of everyone. Jilin did not look any different from before. No one dared to believe that he had just experienced such an intense battle. As for Muzin, it was obvious that he was in a terrible state. There was not a single part of his upper body that was undamaged. There was not a single bone that was not broken. His arms were strangely bent outwards. His chest had completely caved in. No one could bear to look at his face. He really looked like an ordinary person who had been run over by a carriage. Jilin smiled and said, "Don't underestimate humans." Muzin kept gasping for breath, but he couldn't say a word. Jiashu held his shield and began to walk forward. Every step was extremely heavy. This time, Flay did not stop him. Jilin walked towards Muzin. He looked at this human who had given him a chance to exercise. This human was not bad. His body was even sturdier than a mountain rock. He did not know what kind of training he had gone through to be able to reach this stage with a mortal body. However, in front of him, what was the difference between a mountain rock and a body of flesh and blood? Jilin began to walk towards Muzin. Every step he took seemed to be stepping on everyone's hearts. Were they going to witness the fall of a legend today? Jiashu was already prepared to receive the attack. Although he did not have enough information, he could only brace himself. It was all Muzin's fault. He did not know how to change his attack methods. Jiashu grumbled in his heart. Suddenly, a cold light appeared between heaven and earth. It instantly cut through space and landed on Jilin's arm. The moment everyone saw the sword light, they knew that the temperature of the sword light was even colder than the wind and snow of the Snow Wind Empire. This was because it was an extremely powerful sword light. A long-haired man dressed in simple clothes quietly appeared between Jilin and Muzin. He slowly sheathed his sword. Sword Saint of the Middle Empire, Gai Mingwe. Half of Jilin's right arm had been cut off. His bones were completely broken, and only the flesh on the inside was still connected. Jilin was stunned for a few seconds before he realized what had happened. He looked at Gai Mingwe in disbelief, and then looked at his miserable right arm. This human actually dared to injure him to this extent. Damn it, this was unforgivable. Jilin let out a cruel sneer. At the same time, he tore off his right arm and threw it on the ground. He burned it with his dragon flames. Scales began to appear on his body. His eyes shone with a golden light. A new right arm instantly stretched out from where his arm had been cut off. Jilin coldly looked at all the humans. The second rule of the dragon clan stated that if a dragon bled, it must pay with its life. Chapter 64. When the golden light in Jilin's eyes burst out, the entire area within a kilometer of the mobile city seemed to have changed from winter to summer. The world outside was still filled with heavy snow, and the cold wind was still whistling like a knife. However, Not even a snowflake or a wisp of cold wind could float into this area. This was the power of a dragon, enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods, leaving humans in the dust. No human dared to act rashly. Jilin's body began to gradually turn red, and the muscles all over his body expanded like air. Flames spurted out from the pores all over Jilin's body, and these flames completely wrapped Jilin, forming a fireball as tall as a person. Then, this fireball suddenly became huge, occupying a large part of the mobile city platform. The fireball suddenly became bigger, and, at the same time, it also meant that the burning area suddenly increased. Many humans simply couldn't dodge in time and were instantly enveloped by the flames. They didn't even have time to scream before they quietly disappeared. It was as if these people didn't exist in the first place. Jiashu's expression suddenly changed. He clenched the giant shield in his hand and stared at the huge fireball in front of him that was like the sun descending to the world. Such a monster who disregarded human life. Death was not to be regretted. A pair of giant wings stretched out from the flames and suddenly spread out, dispersing the raging flames. Jilin returned to his long-lost dragon form and couldn't help but roar to the sky. He stretched his body to his heart's content, just like a human doing a big stretch. This feeling of unlocking the long shackles of one's body was indeed fascinating. The legendary red Megalosaurus appeared in the world, occupying the greatest human city, showing its existence to the world as if no one else was around. His voice was majestic and heavy, thousands of times louder than the largest war horn of mankind. It was like the magnificent holy sound in the divine kingdom, and also like the roar of the devil in the deepest part of hell. Just by showing its true body, it interrupted the never-ending snowstorm of the Snow-Wind Empire. Under the feet of this creature, humans were naturally in danger. As for whether it would shatter, of course, it depended on Jilin's mood and luck. A creature that only existed in legends and could stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods suddenly appeared in front of them. Naturally, everyone present was so shocked that they lost their ability to move and think. Although that was the case, it was just as Jilin thought. There would always be one or two unique existences among the human population that was as numerous as the sand in the sea. While everyone else was stunned, the Duke quickly regained his composure and shouted, "Protect His Majesty." The Duke's voice reached the ears of the soldiers, causing them to tremble. Years of training had given the soldiers an instinctive response to military orders, not to mention an order as correct and deserving as "Protect His Majesty." The warriors moved instinctively, moving closer to the Iron Blood King at an unprecedented speed. In an instant, countless huge shields were set up in front of the Iron Blood King, forming an indestructible steel wall. The magicians immediately cast their most powerful instantaneous defensive spells. Behind the huge shields, layers of magic barriers were unfolded. However, the mages didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. They began to chant incantations, wanting to release even more powerful and advanced defensive magic. They wanted to add even more protection for their majesty, even if it was just a little bit more. More soldiers stood in front of the huge shields, holding their weapons and pointing them at Jilin. They formed a dense human wall with their flesh and blood, bravely guarding their emperor. Compared to the huge shields and magic barriers, this thick human wall was definitely more reassuring and more terrifying. Because, forming this human wall, every one of them was a warrior, a hero. When the country was on the brink of life and death, they stepped forward bravely. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. How could one avoid disaster and fortune? Even if, in the eyes of the Megalosaurus, this was not worth mentioning, these warriors still chose to do so, doing their best and leaving the rest to fate. Even a legendary powerhouse could not help but be moved. The Duke was very satisfied with the actions of his warriors, and his heart calmed down. He thought to himself, this formation can at least buy His Majesty 3 to 4 seconds, right? Then the Duke stared at Bei Luo, thinking to himself, didn't you say that you have a way to ensure His Majesty's safety? Why aren't you using it? What are you waiting for? But facing the Duke's gaze, Bei Luo was unmoved and still stood steadily beside the equally calm Iron Blood King. Even in such a critical moment, the Duke could not help but think, His Majesty is indeed His Majesty. Just this calmness in the face of danger is something I can never catch up to. If I had known earlier, this would be my ability to make a living. But, Bei Luo, why are you pretending to be calm here? If anything happens to His Majesty, can you bear the responsibility? Just as the Duke was glaring at Bei Luo, spots of light rushed over from afar, landing on the platform to form a ball of light. The Pope walked out of the light and looked at the human wall formed by the warriors, as well as the fearless expressions on their faces. He could not help but nod in praise. How can everything be as you wish, as long as you have a clear conscience? My path is not lonely. Since when did your path become like this? The last time I saw you, didn't you say that you were going to turn into light and bless all living beings? For I saw that the Pope had finally arrived and could not help but mock him. You're late, said Guy Mingwe. How can that be? I was just in time, said the Pope. Why were you gone for so long? Although Aisha has been famous for many years, she has never entered the legendary realm. Logically speaking, she should not have been able to stop you, said Fry. Well, the Pope was about to explain himself. You all seem to be very relaxed. Jilin saw that these ignorant ants were ignoring him and chatting with him, and could not help but feel even more furious. He immediately flapped his wings. A hurricane appeared between heaven and earth. It swept towards the humans. The legendary experts chatted, but their gazes never left Jilin, not even a little bit. Facing Jilin, no one dared to be careless, because they might not even know how they died. The hurricane Jilin created was like the true power of heaven and earth, and it whistled towards the humans. Even the slightest contact could easily tear through steel. Guy Mingwe slammed his shield on the ground. He prayed silently in his heart. May God's glory protect the people. The people will also be grateful for God's grace and obey God's oracle. Descend, holy wall. Guy Mingwe's shield became incomparably huge and appeared in the form of light. A huge shield of light appeared in front of Jilin, and it was even bigger than Jilin. It completely blocked the hurricane and protected all the humans. The hurricane hit the shield of light, and the impact caused the moving city and the ground below to tremble uncontrollably. Guy Mingwe could not help but slide back slightly. Retreat quickly. Don't make unnecessary sacrifices, Guy Mingwe shouted. This was for the people of the Snow Wind Empire. Let Musin stand up. This was for the Pope. The Pope raised his hand and cast holy healing, and holy light enveloped Musin. Musin began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. I'll speak, said the Pope. What? Guy Mingwe replied. You're from a Church of Light? Asked the Pope. Guy Mingwe could not help but glance at his holy wall. That's right. Do you know that I'm the Pope? Asked the Pope. Yes. Then why don't you speak to me more politely? Questioned the Pope. The veins on Guy Mingwe's bald head could not help but twitch. It was not only because of the pressure from Jilin, but also because of the Pope's anger. Guy Mingwe thought to himself, what time is this? I'm still in a mood to talk to you? If it were not for the fact that he could not free his hands, he would have punched him. Although he had heard from the people in the church that the Pope was a little unreliable, Guy Mingwe had never believed it. Before this, in his mind, the Pope had always been an elusive and mysterious expert. But now, it seemed that the Pope lived up to his reputation. Although he had a lot to say, Guy Mingwe's personality dictated that he just gritted his teeth and did not say anything. You're finally here. Musin sat up and said to the Pope, Don't be so troublesome. You still have to heal. Anyway, you're all going to die, Jilin said fiercely. Maybe we will die, but we will not wait for death, said Guy Mingwe. Jilin reached out and clenched his fist, breaking the light shield cleanly. A futile struggle, said Jilin. People know that they will die one day from the moment they know the concept of death. But people are still working hard to live. This is not a futile struggle. This is living in the face of death. This is the love of life, Guy Mingwe said seriously. Jia Xiu defended himself seriously. He had expected the holy wall to be destroyed. With such a large defensive area, it would have been difficult for the weaker side to break through. Ha ha ha, well said. You're just afraid of death. Since you don't dare to die, you can only live helplessly, said Jilin. Guy Minghua pointed to the battlefield full of corpses and said, Who are you saying is afraid of death? Even Jilin was speechless at this time. Guy Minghua's words were really invulnerable. Guy Minghua's words were true because countless dwarves and human warriors sacrificed their lives to make the most solid footnotes for his words. So that's how it is. If life is meaningless, then it's not strange to use it to do meaningless things. Qilin seemed to have understood something and muttered to himself. Guy Minghua did not think that was what he meant. But forget it, there was no need to talk about human life with a dragon. As expected of the Pope, said Musin as he stood up and jumped twice. Of course, said the Pope calmly. But it was this calmness that made others feel like he was showing off. Then let's begin. Flay saw that Musin had recovered and immediately cast a fireball that exceeded the limits of a human. It was considered the start of the team battle. The fireball quickly flew toward Jilin with astonishing momentum, but did not go far before it automatically dissipated into the air, disappearing without a trace. Even Jilin felt that it was a little strange. All the legendary powerhouses looked at Flay in astonishment. All fire-type attacks were ineffective against the Red Calamity. This should have been something that was already known, right? Flay stretched out her finger and scratched her forehead. She said softly, I just wanted to try. The scene became very awkward. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.